By a stony creek in a valley, a black-clad young man was holding a black beetle with a metallic sheen that looked like a cross between a crab and a Hercules beetle. Holding a dagger in his other hand, the young man swiftly cut the still struggling claws off the beetle, revealing white and tender meat. Almost without hesitation, the young man sucked the meat out of the claws as if he were eating a crab, and swallowed it together with larger pieces of tougher meat. Black beetle killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the black beetle to gain 0 to 10 geno points randomly. Black beetle flesh eaten. 0 geno points gained. A strange voice sounded in Han Sen's mind, and some data also appeared. Han Sen, not evolved. Status, none. Lifespan, 200 years. Required for evolution, 100 geno points. Geno points gained, 79. Beast souls gained, none. I have received 0 geno points from more than 30 black beetles in a row. I must have eaten too much black beetle flesh to evolve from it further. 0 points. When will I ever finish the first evolution and gain status? Han Sen looked frustrated. Over 100 years ago, science and technology reached a very high level, and humans finally mastered space teleportation technology. Shockingly, when they tried to be teleported, they found that they were neither sent back to the past nor teleported to the future. They didn't even travel from one planet to another. A completely different world lay at the other end of the space teleport channel. A world that human beings could not have imagined. In this world, all scientific and technological means lost their function. A machine gun in this world was not even as useful as a steel knife. Missiles and nuclear weapons would not explode, same as a heap of scrap iron. No mechanical or electronic equipment would work either. All kinds of horrible creatures inhabited this world. Human beings, who used to stand on top of the food chain because of their wisdom and technology, fell to the bottom. But when people killed certain relatively weak creatures and ate their flesh, they were surprised to find that their own bodies changed considerably and evolved quickly in ways that science could not explain. What made people pleasantly surprised was that in this world, with the evolution of the body, their lifespans also increased, which was amazing news to all mankind. In the following century, more and more people entered this world called God's Sanctuary, gradually became familiar with the rules of this world, hunted its creatures, and saw their own bodies evolve. The higher the degree of physical evolution, the longer the life. Theoretically, if you could continue evolving, it could be possible to live forever. In this world, science and technology became completely useless. The only things that could help humans were the most primitive fighting skills. Ancient martial arts, which were almost forgotten in modern society, had an unexpected effect here. All kinds of ancient martial arts had been redeveloped, and after more than 100 years of development, new martial arts schools were formed and became prominent. In addition to ancient martial arts, God's Sanctuary offered another tool to enhance humans, the beast soul. When killing a creature in God's Sanctuary, a person had a chance to obtain the beast soul of the creature. Beast souls had all kinds of forms and appearances. Some could be summoned to fight for men, and some appeared in the form of armor or weapon. In addition, some beast souls could even help humans transform so they could take the shape of terrifying monsters, magical birds flying between heaven and earth, or insects drilling underground. Neither martial arts nor beast souls had anything to do with Han Sen. Even in modern society, advanced science and technology were in the hands of just a few people. Han Sen completed integrated compulsory education and entered God's Sanctuary when he turned 16. What he had learned from school was no more than the beginning-level new martial arts that everyone knew. As for beast souls, they were so expensive that Han Sen couldn't afford even the cheapest. Without martial arts and beast souls, or even advanced man-made alloy weapons, Han Sen was only able to kill some low-level creatures to eat their flesh and evolve, and he was having a difficult time in God's Sanctuary. But the more meat of low-level creatures he ate, the less effect of evolution he gained. 3 months in God's Sanctuary and he still could not complete a physical evolution. Han Sen had tried to kill some of the more powerful creatures, but even the weakest primitive creature, the copper-toothed beast, almost took his life. He had to rest for nearly a month before returning to God's Sanctuary. By this time Han Sen had eaten all kinds of ordinary creatures around him, and it wouldn't help to eat their flesh anymore. If he didn't risk hunting more advanced creatures, he would never evolve. When he was about to try to kill a copper-toothed beast, Han Sen saw something climbing out from the ripples of the creek. He originally thought it was a black beetle, but immediately noticed something different. All black beetles had black shells, but a bright golden color caught his eye. Han Sen gazed at the creature climbing out of the water. It really was a black beetle, but different from the ordinary ones because of its golden body as big as a basketball. It was like a sculpture carved from gold, and its eyes were crystal clear, like gems. It did not even look like a living thing unless observed carefully. Why is this black beetle so strange? Han Sen stared at the golden black beetle. Recently he had killed countless black beetles and knew everything about them. Their vision was poor, but their hearing was very sensitive. As long as he remained still, even in close proximity, a black beetle would not notice his presence. Han Sen stared at the strange beetle, and unexpectedly, it climbed toward him. Without hesitation, when the golden black beetle crawled next to Han Sen, he held down the golden black beetle's shell with one hand and swiftly cut into its fragile joints with the dagger in his other hand. He made 6 clean cuts vertically and horizontally to remove all 6 claws of the beetle. The golden black beetle struggled and flipped over. Taking this opportunity, Han Sen pierced his dagger into a white mark on its belly and turned it sharply. The golden black beetle suddenly stopped moving. Sacred blood creature black beetle killed. Beast soul of sacred blood black beetle gained. Eat the flesh of sacred blood black beetle to gain 0 to 10 geno points randomly. Han Sen was stunned by the sudden voice in his head, and he could hardly believe it was true. Sacred blood creature and sacred blood beast soul, were those even real? The creatures of God's sanctuary were divided into 4 parts: ordinary creatures, primitive creatures, mutant creatures and sacred blood creatures. Different geno points could be gained by eating flesh of creatures of different types. At that time, there were 4 God's sanctuary phases known to men. With each physical evolution completed, access to the next space would be permitted. The more powerful the geno points used in evolution, the higher the likelihood of surviving in the next space. Sacred blood beast souls were without any doubt the best beast souls. Any sacred blood beast soul could be sold at an enormous price. When Han Sen finally realized what had really happened, he was almost trembling. Holding the dagger to pick open the shell of the black beetle, he filled his mouth with meat as tender as jelly. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. Feeling the flesh turn to energy and hearing the voice in his mind almost brought Han Sen to tears. He grabbed a claw and sucked out all meat from it, feeling waves of energy hitting his body and boiling his blood. There was not much difference between eating a sacred blood black beetle and eating a crab. After sucking the meat clean from all 6 claws, Han Sen started to cut the meat inside the shell. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. The strange voice continuously sounded in Han Sen's mind and made him feel on top of the world. As Han Sen was cutting away, he felt his dagger cut into something hard that made a sound like metal. Han Sen stopped. Black beetles and crabs are alike. They looked tough, but inside their shells there would be nothing but boneless meat, so how could there be metal? He removed the dagger, pulled aside the meat that had been cut, and saw a corner of black metal. Han Sen cut open all the meat surrounding it, and soon the black metal was completely exposed. At first he thought it was metal, but taking it out, he discovered that it was a black crystal the size and shape of a pigeon egg. Han Sen took the crystal in his hand and didn't feel anything abnormal. The crystal was just like a beautiful, rounded black pebble. But with a closer look, there seemed to be millions of stars shining in it, creating incredible beauty. Here is the easiest area in God's sanctuary, Han Sen thought. Even primitive creatures are hard to find here, let alone sacred blood creatures. How did this sacred blood black beetle suddenly appear? And I've never heard of a sacred blood black beetle before. Black beetles are such low life after all. And this sacred blood black beetle is so outrageously weak. Is its appearance related to the crystal? There was no clue, so he simply ate all the rest of the black beetle meat and was stuffed. He gained a total of 7 sacred geno points. 7 sacred geno points were beyond his wildest dreams. With his background, he needed to risk everything even to kill a primitive creature, let alone a sacred blood creature. The shell of the sacred blood black beetle was also precious material, so Han Sen picked up all the claws and stuffed them into his pocket, together with the upper and lower shells. The shell of ordinary black beetles almost had no value, but the shell of a sacred blood black beetle would probably make a soup that could give him 1 or 2 more sacred geno points. It was the first time Han Sen had eaten a sacred blood creature. Technically he could max out and get 10 sacred geno points, he already had 7 from the meat, and the other 3 should be in the shell. If he were to sell the shell, he could probably afford a nice private aircraft in Levo Interstellar Alliance with the money he received. On the way back to Steel Armor Castle, everyone was pointing at him, gloating and laughing, and no one would come near him. Everyone in the sanctuary was looking at him as if he were a monster. Normally, when an ordinary person went to the sanctuary, even if he were poor, if his martial skills were not too bad, he could always find some companions and kill a few primitive creatures together, and he would be nowhere near as miserable as Han Sen. However, in the entire steel armor castle, no one was willing or had the courage to have anything to do with Hansen. More than 3 months ago, Hansen had entered God's sanctuary for the first time. The moment he stepped outside steel armor shelter, he saw a giant white wolf unicorn standing with its back towards him around the corner of the rampart. Without hesitation, Hansen grabbed his dagger and fiercely stabbed the unicorn in the ass. This stab turned Hansen and Qin Xian together into the biggest laughing stock in steel armor shelter. Yes, the white wolf unicorn was not a beast, but a human like Hansen himself. She was just transforming using a beast soul. Qin Xian was also the most powerful woman in steel armor shelter. She was likely to finish her first evolution with sacred Geno points and embark on the path of evolution. A new guy stabbing Qin Xian's rear end became the biggest joke in steel armor shelter. Although no one dared to mention this to Qin Xian's face, secretly everyone was laughing their asses off. And ass freak became Hansen's well-known nickname in steel armor shelter. Then Qin Xian declared that whoever spent time with Hansen would become her enemy. In steel armor shelter, few people could afford to be Qin Xian's enemy. Even if they could afford it, no one would risk antagonizing Qin Xian for the sake of a nobody and ass freak. That was why Hansen had such a difficult time, but he didn't really blame Qin Xian. It was his fault in the first place. He was too nervous the first time he came to God's sanctuary, plus he had never seen creatures in his previous world or transformers before, which all led to the unforgivable mistake. Hansen was already grateful that Qin Xian did not kill him in anger. The only lucky thing was that the teleportation into God's sanctuary was always random, and there were no familiar faces in steel armor shelter, so no one knew his real name. Hansen returned to his room, made a fire, and started boiling the black beetle claws and shells in a pot. Without tools and know-how, he could only use the most primitive methods to process the shells and extract the Geno essence. The shell of a sacred blood creature would take more than an hour or two to cook, so Hansen covered the lid and took out the black crystal to take a closer look. Still, no clues whatsoever. Suddenly, Hansen caught a glimpse of the caged green-scaled beast the size of a civet cat in the corner of his room and suddenly had an idea. Like black beetles, this green-scaled beast was an ordinary creature. Hansen used to prey on them and bring them back to cook and eat to increase his Geno points. But later, green-scaled beasts no longer increased his Geno points, so Hansen didn't eat the last beast and forgot about it. Surprisingly, it was still alive. He grabbed the moribund green-scaled beast from the cage, hesitated for a moment and was about to feed the black crystal to the beast. To his surprise, seeing the black crystal, the dying green-scaled beast gathered all its strength to stretch out its tongue, roll the black crystal back into its mouth and swallow the whole crystal. There is indeed something magical about the black crystal. Hansen was stunned and found that the green-scaled beast seemed considerably more lively after swallowing the crystal, its foreclaws scratching and head moving to bite Hansen's hand, which was on its neck. Hansen threw the green-scaled beast back into the cage and carefully watched it. The beast, which hadn't fed for days, completely recovered its vitality, thrashing and scratching wildly in the cage, just like it had when it was first caught. Hansen sat across from the cage and watched the movements of the green-scaled beast. He had a guess, and if he was right, he might have obtained something incredible, something more exciting than a sacred blood creature. But Hansen was afraid he was wrong, so he could only stare at the green-scaled beast anxiously, hoping to see the change that he desired. Hansen nervously stared intently and did not realize that he was starving until he smelled bone broth from the pot. Looking at the time, he noticed almost 24 hours had passed. Rising to check the black beetle shell in the pot, he saw the golden color of the shell had been boiled off and the broth had become golden. It smelled so good that the hungry young man's mouth watered. About to scoop up a bowl of soup, Hansen suddenly heard iron breaking from the cage of the green-scaled beast. He quickly turned around and saw the green-scaled beast had bitten off an iron bar of the cage and stretched out his head from the inside. Its light green scales had now completely turned a dark green color. Its teeth had become sharp and the tips of its foreclaws were like iron hooks. The beast was about to come out of the cage. Hansen was pleasantly surprised and pulled out the dagger from his waist. He rushed to the front of the cage and stabbed the dagger into the lower belly of the green-scaled beast. With a turn of the dagger, the green-scaled beast stopped struggling. Primitive creature green-scaled beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the primitive green-scaled beast to gain 0 to 10 points randomly. The strange voice sounded in Hansen's mind and left him stunned. Primitive green-scaled beast. Primitive creature. So the crystal can really make these creatures evolve. Hansen was overwhelmed with joy and did not know how to react. After a long time, he suddenly cut open the green-scaled beast with the dagger and uncovered the crystal as big as a pigeon egg. Taking no heed of the blood on it, he kissed the crystal twice and then wiped it clean, holding it in his hands like it was a great treasure. The crystal was really the reason the Black Beetle became a sacred blood creature. If the green-scaled beast had continued to evolve, could it have become a sacred blood creature too? Han-sen almost dared not think about it, because it was just too amazing. He was so excited that his hands were trembling while holding the crystal. He bit his tongue and cried out of pain so as to know that it really was not a dream. After remaining excited for quite a while, Han-sen carefully put the crystal away, gobbled up the shell broth, and gained another sacred Geno point, bringing his Geno point count to 8. Without tools and means, his primitive method couldn't extract all Geno essence from the shell, but it was good enough that he gained one sacred Geno point. Han-sen realized that he had gained a sacred blood beast soul of a black beetle when he killed the golden black beetle, and he quickly accessed his profile. Han-sen, not evolved. Status, none. Lifespan, 200 years. Requirements for evolution, 100 Geno points. Geno points gained, 79 Geno points, 8 sacred Geno points. Beast soul gained, sacred blood black beetle. Type of sacred blood black beetle's beast soul, armor. What would the armor of sacred blood black beetle's beast soul look like? Before Han-sen finished the thought, a golden shadow shot out of thin air, looking exactly like the golden black beetle. The golden black beetle flew to Han-sen's chest, turned into a golden liquid and started to cover his whole body. In the blink of an eye, Han-sen's whole body, together with his hair, was all wrapped up. The streamlined gold armor was full of power and impact, and covered his whole body as if it were a suit of Gothic medieval armor instilled with improved aerodynamics. It looked just like a piece of art. The whole suit of armor felt full of power and speed, making Han-sen look slender and majestic, as if his whole body were full of explosive power. With shining metallic luster, the armor was gorgeous and had a solid texture. At first glance, it was even somewhat like the gold cloth worn by golden saints. The difference between the gold cloth and the beast soul armor was that the armor covered the head and body completely, with only a few gaps in the joints where different pieces overlapped, just like the black beetle itself, which was the only weakness of the beast soul armor. Han-sen moved around in the armor and there was no feeling of heaviness or clumsiness. Instead he felt that his body had become a little lighter and full of energy. Indeed, this was armor from a sacred blood beast soul. It is way more gorgeous than the ones from primitive beast souls that I often have seen at steel armor shelter. Han-sen felt ecstatic. He used to envy people in armor of primitive beast souls and had never thought he would get a suit of a sacred blood beast soul one day. Yate Group President Zhao Yalong completed the third evolution, entered Fourth God Sanctuary, and became the 83rd human in history to enter Fourth God Sanctuary. His lifespan has reached 500 years and he has gained the status of demigod. The prodigy from Rycote Galaxy, Lang, entered Second God Sanctuary with 100 mutation Geno points. His lifespan has reached 300 years and he has gained the status of Evolver. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Hemingway, killed a demigod creature Star of the Ocean yesterday, and was the first to accomplish this feat. According to authoritative experts, in 10 years someone will complete the fourth evolution for the first time and advance into Fifth God Sanctuary. Han-sen had just teleported from the steel armor shelter and the news was playing on a virtual screen. Evolver, Surpasser and Demigod. With the black crystal, I will be able to do all that, and go even farther. Han-sen shook his fist, stepped away from the teleport station, and took the maglev train home. Before he went into the yard, Han-sen heard a harsh female voice. Luo Sulan, do you want to take the old house of the Hans? This house was our parents, and my two elder brothers and I each own a part. Now my eldest brother has passed. We won't bully you, since you are a widow, and will leave you his share. But if you want to take everything, we will never agree. That's right. The voice of a middle-aged man chimed in. The old house has always been the inheritance of our parents. All of us have rights to it, and you can't keep it for yourselves. Your family has lived here for more than 20 years, so you have already taken advantage of us in a big way. It is time to divide the inheritance. My brother has said it, a soft-pitched male voice continued. You lived in the old house for more than 20 years. We will not collect the rent, but this old house is our inheritance and has to be divided. A young woman's voice could be heard saying, we have an estimate from a lawyer, and this old house is now worth more than 3 million. We are 3 households, so we should get 1 million each. You can either give each of us 1 million and own this old house outright, or sell the house, and then we all split the money. We are okay with either option you choose. Exactly, now that our eldest brother is gone, we won't bully his widow and kids. You can give us money or sell the house, as you like, the harsh first voice began again. Brother and sister, there is no need to force me. You know our situation. We don't have 2 million, a woman said sadly. Then put the house up for sale, the harsh woman immediately said. Where would we live without a house? Han Sen just graduated and Han Yen is about to go to school, the sad woman said. Sister-in-law, this is not reasonable. How are you the only one with troubles? Your kids Han Sen and Han Yen are only enrolled in integrated compulsory education, while my Han Hao goes to a private school. His tuition gives me gray hair every year. Sister, you are right. We are all having a hard time and everyone needs money. Why don't we just sell the house? We could all take some, and you could afford Han Yan's education, said the effeminate voice. Anyway, you either give us money or sell the house. Your choice, the young woman said coldly. Outside the house, Han Sen became furious as he listened. He pushed the door open and saw his mother shedding tears while holding his sister, Han Yen. The 5-year-old girl curled up in the arms of her mother, her big eyes full of fear. Next to them, 2 men and 2 women were all smiling indifferently. How dare you come here and ask for the old house? Han Sen pointed to the fierce-looking fat woman and exclaimed in anger. Aunt, you used to be an accountant in the company and brought about tens of millions in bad debts. Did my dad not help you after you begged him? Han Sen, what nonsense. Who caused bad debts? Stop lying, the skinny guy with the effeminate voice cried, pointing to Han Sen. Uncle, you embezzled the company's public funds to invest and lost a few million. Han Sen pointed to the skinny guy. Did you not come to my home and get on your knees to beg my dad for help? And you, uncle, you owed so many gambling debts that you were almost forced to commit suicide. Who helped you? When you were almost beaten to death, who saved your life? Han Sen pointed to the fat, middle-aged man. Starry Group wanted to acquire our family business. If my dad didn't represent all of you and then had a falling out with Starry Group, would he have died in such a shady way? Han Sen clenched his teeth, looking at the 4. But you skipped my dad's funeral and sold the company to Starry Group upon his death. Did you give us any of the money you got from selling the company? Also, who paid for your houses when you got married? Were those houses any cheaper than this old house? Did you take care of your parents for a single day when they were alive? How dare you come here to ask for a share of the old house? Stop it. Your father only did what he wanted to do. The company belonged to my father, and we all have shares. He can't decide for us. And surely, we can spend the money of the company, Uncle Han Lei said brazenly. That's true. Your father was a dictator, and we are only getting our own money back. It does not matter what you say. Give the money or sell the house, otherwise we'll see you in court. You will lose the case wherever we go, Aunt Han Yume shouted. It's all your dad's fault. They started to accuse Han Sen's late father. Han Sen was shaking with anger and felt wronged for his father. When his father took over the company, it was only a small business, worth 1 or 2 million. He spent so much effort for the company to bloom and had to look after his family and make up for their mistakes. A few times the company was on the brink of bankruptcy due to liquidity problems. And he even died for the company. After his death, however, his wife and children were bullied by the relatives that he used to help. When Han Sen's father was alive, he always said that they were family and there's no need to argue. And what an irony it has become now. If they truly needed the money and had difficulties, Han Sen would just agree to give it. But all the private aircrafts they piloted here were worth more than $1 million. And they at least got 10 million from selling the company, which all fell into their pockets, and nothing was given to Han Sen's family. It was simply impossible that they didn't even have $1 million. After making a fuss at Han Sen's home, Han Yume and Han Lei gave his family an ultimatum: they had to come up with the money or sell the house in 1 month, otherwise they would file a lawsuit. I'm so useless that I can't even keep the house. Luo Sulan held Han Yen, her face covered with tears. Luo Sulan was a gentle lady. When Han Sen's father was still alive, she was treated like a princess. She didn't even know how to sweep the floor, let alone do other chores. Han Sen knew how difficult it was for her to raise his sister and him after his father passed away. Don't worry, Mom. I am here even though Dad isn't. I will not let them take away our house. You take a rest and I'll consult Uncle Zhang on the matter. Han Sen called a friend of his father's, Mr. Zhang. He was the lawyer who used to work in their family business as legal counsel. Hi, Uncle Zhang. This is Sen. Is your back any better? I have a legal matter that I want to ask you about, so. Han Sen looked a little pale when he hung up. He had confirmed that his relative told the truth: they do have rights to a part of the house. And if they really did go to court, the verdict would be close to what they've asked for, to either pay them money or sell the house. Sen, what did Mr. Zhang say? Luo Sulan asked Han Sen, looking at him nervously. Don't you worry, Mom. I have checked with Uncle Zhang and there is a solution. You just make sure Yen is okay, and I'll take care of this. The house will not be taken away by anyone, Han Sen said with a smile. That's good, that's great. Luo Sulan breathed a sigh of relief. Having rested at home for a night, Han Sen took a train to the teleport station and entered God's sanctuary in the morning. Han Sen was teleported to his room at the steel armor shelter. When one was teleported into God's sanctuary, one would appear in a certain room only accessible to him or her. Unless permitted by the owner, others were not able to enter the room. Before finishing the first evolution and entering second God's sanctuary, this was Han Sen's home in God's sanctuary. Now Han Sen had no power or influence. The only solution was to come up with $2 million in a month if he wanted to keep the house. Although he felt it was unfair, without power, there was nothing left to do. $2 million was an enormous amount for a young man who just finished integrated compulsory education. In the past, Han Sen couldn't have earned $2 million in a year, let alone in a month. But now everything was different. In fact, if he had not already cooked the shell of the sacred blood Black Beetle, the shell alone would be worth 1 or 2 million. Even without the shell, he still had the black crystal that could make creatures evolve. As long as he had that, 2 million was nothing. Looking at the body of the primitive green-scaled beast on the ground, Han Sen hesitated for a moment before cutting the body into pieces. He then dried the meat, made it into beef jerky and carried it with him in his waist pack. He must first catch a creature before he could use the crystal to make it evolve and trade the flesh of the evolved creature for money. Now that Han Sen owned a suit of sacred blood beast soul armor, he could up his game and start to hunt primitive creatures instead of ordinary creatures. Primitive creatures weren't worth much, and he would waste a day's time waiting for an ordinary creature to evolve into a primitive one. To come up with 2 million, Han Sen would need to sell at least a mutant creature. Primitive creatures were usually seen a dozen kilometers from steel armor shelter. Han Sen had not dared to go that far before, but now he has had his armor. This time, his goal was no longer a copper-toothed beast, the weakest among all primitive creatures, but the swift mantis often spotted in Zephyr Valley. Although a primitive creature, a swift mantis had a fragile body and could easily be killed by a normal alloy dagger if stabbed in a vulnerable spot. However, a swift mantis was so fast that ordinary people couldn't keep up with it. And its pair of hacksaw-like forelegs could easily split human bones. Once hit by the forelegs, a person would be crippled, if not killed. So few humans would go to hunt this creature. For Han Sen, however, the swift mantis was the best option. It was in the end only a primitive creature, and there was no way it could cut open his sacred blood beast soul armor. If he couldn't be hurt by the mantis, surely he could kill it. The most important thing was that with claws and wings cut off, a swift mantis could no longer fight back but could still live. This way, Han Sen could easily take it back, keep it in his room, and use the black crystal to make it evolve into a mutant creature before he sold its flesh. Of course, if he were able to kill a few swift mantises and got lucky, he might even gain a beast soul. The beast soul of a swift mantis was in the shape of a swift jagged blade, which was a long dagger, a type of weapon Han Sen had mastered. Although the swift jagged blade was only a primitive beast soul weapon, it was the sharpest of all primitive weapons, and could even compare to some mutant beast soul weapons. Because of the danger of hunting swift mantises, few would go to Zephyr Valley, and even fewer had obtained a swift jagged blade. If the rare weapon were to be sold, it would cost more than 2 million. So, if Han Sen could score a beast soul of a swift mantis, there would be no need to sell mutant creature flesh anymore. The closer Han Sen got to Zephyr Valley, the fewer people he could see. Around the valley, there was no human activity at all. Han Sen did not dare to go too deep, so he found a hidden place and summoned the sacred blood Black Beetle beast soul to cover himself in the golden armor. Taking a deep breath, he sneaked towards Zephyr Valley. Han Sen did not dare to go too fast. The valley was covered with trees and wild grass as tall as a man. As the trees and grass swung with the wind, it was difficult to spot any swift mantis that might be hiding there. Even momentary carelessness could lead to broken bones from a mantis attack. The closer Han Sen got to Zephyr Valley, the fewer people he could see. Around the valley, there was no human activity at all. Han Sen did not dare to go too deep, so he found a hidden place and summoned the sacred blood Black Beetle beast soul to cover himself in the golden armor. Taking a deep breath, he sneaked towards Zephyr Valley. Han Sen did not dare to go too fast. The valley was covered with trees and wild grass as tall as a man. As the trees and grass swung with the wind, it was difficult to spot any swift mantis that might be hiding there. Even momentary carelessness could lead to broken bones from a mantis attack. Suddenly, Han Sen saw something green, about a foot long, sticking to the grass like a leaf. If he didn't look closely, he would have thought it was part of the grass and would have never imagined it to be a swift mantis that could split a human skull with a single blow. Its pair of sickle-like, jagged forelegs were even longer than its body. Dark green in color, the forelegs were covered in a metal sheen, and were nothing like its fragile body. The rigidity of the forelegs was definitely comparable to the most advanced alpha alloy. Han Sen was lucky that he found the swift mantis before it saw him. Moving towards it, he calculated the nearest he could get to it before being noticed by the swift mantis. When he was about 6 feet away from the swift mantis, Han Sen did not dare to go any farther, fearing he might lose the opportunity to attack by stealth. Tightly holding the dagger in his hand, Han Sen rushed out from the grass and cut at the swift mantis' waist in a fast and ruthless strike. But Han Sen had still underestimated the speed and responsiveness of the swift mantis. It had noticed his presence the moment he rushed out. All of a sudden, it rose into the air, gliding with wings spread towards Han Sen in a truly swift move. Its forelegs had cut him in the head before he could even react. Han Sen subconsciously stepped back in shock, yet the mantis' forelegs still hit his head. With a sound of metal clashing, Han Sen felt only slight discomfort, as if his head were hit by a stone. And there was not even a scratch on the sacred blood beast's soul armor. Filled with ecstasy, Han Sen seized the opportunity to cut into the slim waist of the swift mantis in front of him with a fierce stab. The swift mantis was cut into 2 halves, green mantis blood splashing him wet all over. Han Sen didn't care at all and listened to the strange voice in his head blissfully. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift mantis to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Touching his helmet where the swift mantis cut to feel it was still smooth, Han Sen thought to himself in excitement, haha, the armor is everything. With my armor, I could kill whatever I want to kill and no one could ever hurt me. I wouldn't even fear mutant creatures. Han Sen suddenly gained courage and stopped hiding. He marched to Zephyr Valley and alerted several swift mantises to attack, but they couldn't hurt him at all by cutting his armor. Han Sen took the opportunity to kill them all, each with 1 stab. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift mantis to gain 0 to 10 points randomly. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. The voice continuously sounded in his mind, adding to his thrill. He stabbed his way through the valley and killed more 20 mantises in succession. Su Xiaoqiao was on his way to Zephyr Valley as well, quietly mulling over his own bad luck. His parents were the owners of an interstellar conglomerate and were considered both distinguished and aristocrats. He, however, was randomly assigned to Steel Armor Shelter, where he had no friends or even acquaintances. To get an aristocratic title, Su Xiaoqiao could only choose to follow Qin Xian in order to max out on mutant geno points and become an evolver. There were 2 types of titles in Levo Interstellar Alliance. One was distinguished. Once one became a surpasser, one could be certified as distinguished. The other was an aristocratic. If one could evolve with 100 mutant or more advanced geno points, one could be certified as an aristocrat. Either title involved a lot of benefits in the Alliance, and most importantly they were a symbol of social status. Today in the Alliance, people were more and more snobby. People from the upper class wouldn't even talk to someone without a title, even when doing business. Advanced titles like Sacred Blood Aristocrat were beyond Su Xiaoqiao's dreams. All he wanted was to gain the title of Ordinary Aristocrat by maxing out on mutant geno points and completing an evolution. However, to get 100 mutant geno points was still too difficult for him on his own. He did bring a lot of money to Steel Armor Shelter, but money could only buy ordinary and primitive creature flesh, as very few people would sell mutant creatures. Only people who aimed to max out on sacred geno points like Qin Xian would sometimes sell the mutant creature flesh they had. However, it wasn't money that she wanted, but loyalty and service. Su Xiaoqiao was now running errands for Qin Xian, exploring the places less known to people and looking for traces of sacred blood and mutant creatures to gather information for her. With the information, she could then gather a team to hunt down these creatures, and the team members would get mutant creature flesh in return. Su Xiaoqiao had been exploring for a month and found no traces of mutant creatures, not to mention sacred blood ones. Running out of supplies, he had to return to Steel Armor Shelter. When he passed Zephyr Valley, he thought there might be mutant creatures around, as the area was so sparsely populated. After he sneaked in the valley, he felt something strange. He didn't see any swift mantises, not even one. A mile into the valley, all he saw were some messy traces on the ground. Someone must have wiped out the swift mantises. Fist guy or son of heaven? No. Although there are signs of fighting, there should be more damage if it were a group of people. Surprised, Su Xiaoqiao sped into the valley, wondering what had happened. As he expected, there were many green blood stains from swift mantises along the way. He followed the blood stains and turned the corner. What he saw stopped him in his tracks, appalled. Next to the piled bodies of swift mantises stood a golden figure. In the sun, the figure looked like a robot in gold cast armor. Brother, you killed all these swift mantises. Su Xiaoqiao saw no one except for the guy in golden armor. The dead mantises were still bleeding, so they couldn't have been dead for long. Su Xiaoqiao couldn't believe that someone was able to kill so many mantises in such a short amount of time. Although the swift mantis was only a primitive creature, considering the sharpness of its forelegs and its speed, even those who had maxed out on primitive geno points didn't dare to provoke it. After all, there were too many weak spots on human body, and no one wanted to risk losing his life or getting severely injured from a mantis cut. There were at least 3 dozen dead swift mantises on the ground. Even Qin Xian would need some helping hands to achieve this. Su Xiaoqiao wouldn't believe that someone could have done it alone. Want some? 1,000 levo dollars each. Han Sen was just considering what to do with the mantises. He was on a killing spree and forgot the fact that there was no way he could eat so much mantis meat. And even if he could eat them all, only the first few could gain him geno points. 1,000 each? Are you sure? Su Xiaoqiao looked at him, surprised. Although many people were able to hunt primitive creatures, they were in short supply, especially the ones that most people had never eaten, like swift mantis. After all, people's energy was limited, and there was a limit to how many geno points the meat from the same type of creature could offer. Only by eating the flesh of a variety of creatures could one keep collecting geno points. Those who were relatively well off would all be willing to pay for the creatures they hadn't eaten yet in order to be able to quickly max out on their primitive geno points. Therefore, the primitive creatures that were easy to kill could bring a few hundred each, while the ones that were difficult to hunt, such as the swift mantis, could sell for 2,000 or 3,000 each and still be in short supply. Su Xiaoqiao calculated and figured that he could double or triple the price if he could transport these mantis bodies back. Yes, 1,000 levo dollars each. Han Sen nodded. It wasn't that Han Sen did not know what the mantises were worth. Without a car or other tools, there was simply no way he could move all these bodies back on his own. And if he left now, the bodies might be stolen when he returned. Moreover, Han Sen did not want to waste his time and energy on this. He had more important things to do, and he could take some loss of the profits. As the wholesaler, he had to leave some profit to the retailer. Sure, I'll take them all. How many are there? Su Xiaoqiao was on board. The swift mantises could bring him more than money. Primitive creatures like the swift mantis that ordinary people couldn't easily access would make great gifts. No one could refuse such a nice offer, as long as they hadn't maxed out on primitive geno points. A total of 43. I'll give you a discount and charge only 40,000. Han Sen was just casually asking and did not expect this ordinary-looking guy to be so rich that he could buy them all. Su Xiaoqiao took out his wallet and pulled out 10 $10,000 notes. Brother, I'll give you 50,000 for these mantises. The other 50,000 is a down payment for whatever good stuff you may have in the future. I'll always give you a good price and would pay even higher for mutant creature flesh. 100,000 was a small amount for Su Xiaoqiao. It would even cost him as much to buy someone a fancy dinner. This person was so badass that he killed all these mantises on his own, so it was highly likely that he could hunt mutant creatures too. If it was possible to purchase mutant creature flesh from him, a few 100 million was nothing. Couldn't tell you were rich, Han Sen took the money and said bluntly, looking at Xiaoqiao slightly surprised. In all honesty, money is all I have. If you have mutant creature flesh to sell, do let me know. The price is definitely not a problem, Su Xiaoqiao boasted, afraid that he might lose this great opportunity. Great. What's your name and address? I will come and find you if I have something. Han Sen appreciated Xiaoqiao's generosity, and thought he might be an ideal buyer for the mutant creature he planned to produce using the black crystal. After all, the black crystal had to remain a secret. Selling the creature to one person was much better than selling it in the market in front of everyone. And he didn't even need to worry about the price since Xiaoqiao was incredibly rich. Brother, my name is Su Xiaoqiao, and that's my real name. My room number at Steel Armor Shelter is 1046. How about you? What's your name and where do you live? Su Xiaoqiao said. $. That's the only thing I care about. Prepare some money, and I'll go to room 1046 once I have something. Han Sen put the money into his pocket, waved goodbye to Xiaoqiao and left Zephyr Valley. Having been through his father's death, Han Sen did not want to have too many exchanges with others. He just wanted to take care of his mother and sister and do his own thing. Other people or things didn't really affect him. Brother, I'll wait for you. You must come. Remember, the price is definitely not a problem. Su Xiaoqiao shouted at the back of Han Sen while waving his hand. After Han Sen left, Su Xiaoqiao couldn't help but call out, "How could I get these back?" Su Xiaoqiao thought for a while and decided to carry some back in a bag and ask some friends to help him carry the rest. Fortunately, there were almost no humans in Xiahir Valley. When Su Xiaoqiao came back with friends, all the bodies were still there. "Xiaoqiao, is it true that Dollar killed all these swift mantises?" Su Xiaoqiao's friends looked wide-eyed at the pile of mantis bodies. "Of course. Although I did not see him hunting, there was no one else in Zephyr Valley at the time and the mantises had just died. Who else could it be?" Su Xiaoqiao said. "I think it must be a gang of people that killed these swift mantises, and others must have left him to deal with the bodies. I don't believe one person could kill so many mantises. He must be bragging." He was definitely bragging. None of Su Xiaoqiao's friends believed Han Sen killed the swift mantises alone. Han Sen didn't go back to Steel Armor Shelter after leaving Zephyr Valley. In a flash, he killed every swift mantis in a frenzy so that there were none left. "Well, I'll just go hunt a copper-toothed beast. There are plenty of them near Steel Armor Shelter and there is a high chance of catching a mutant copper-toothed beast, so it wouldn't seem too suspicious if I were to produce a mutant one using the crystal." Han Sen found a habitat of copper-toothed beasts and wanted to catch one that was alone. Only able to find a small group of copper-toothed beasts, Han Sen went ahead and killed all of them but one, taking advantage of his tough armor. Primitive creature copper-toothed beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of copper-toothed beast to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Primitive creature copper-toothed beast killed. Primitive beast soul of copper-toothed beast gained. Eat the flesh of copper-toothed beast to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Han Sen's eyes widened in surprise. The 43 swift mantises and thousands of ordinary creatures he had killed didn't render a single beast soul. Now he had killed only 2 copper-toothed beasts and gained a beast soul. To get a beast soul requires pure luck. Han Sen was filled with joy. Although it was common, the beast soul of a copper-toothed beast was quite nice to have. The copper-toothed beast was one of the weakest among all primitive creatures, but its beast soul was popular. Han Sen summoned the new beast soul, and a porcupine-like shadow with bronze fangs shifted into a bronze crescent spear in his hand. The crescent spear had a bronzy sheen and a menacing look with its crescent-shaped spearhead. Type of primitive beast soul of copper-toothed beast, weapon. Han Sen played with the spear for a while, looking quite fierce. He was taught basic spear skills at school. Han Sen was interested in all kinds of weapons, so he learned well. Han Sen put away his spear before he grabbed the living copper-toothed beast and went back. On his way back, he found a lonely spot to remove his armor. Looking like himself again, Han Sen went back to Steel Armor Shelter, carrying the knocked-out and tied-up copper-toothed beast on his shoulder. At the gate of the shelter, a gang of about a dozen people were marching out, all riding on different tall beast soul mounts, headed by a man wearing steel armor and carrying a blood-red sword on his back. The man was riding a triceratops-like beast soul mount, looking mighty and majestic, attracting envious glances from all around. In Steel Armor Shelter, there are 3 outstanding persons who aim to complete evolution by maxing out on sacred geno points. This man, Son of Heaven, was one of them. Han Sen didn't know his real name and identity, but he was definitely a king in Steel Armor Shelter. Carrying the copper-toothed beast, Han Sen stepped aside to let the gang pass. However, Son of Heaven stopped his mount when passing by him. Crack. Son of Heaven looked at Han Sen and slashed him on the shoulder with a leather whip. The copper-toothed beast fell on the ground, and Han Sen's clothes were ripped apart. A wound started to swell on his shoulder and back. "Who had the nerve to sell you this primitive creature?" Son of Heaven asked in a cold tone, looking down at him condescendingly. In Steel Armor Shelter, everyone knew that Son of Heaven was wooing Qin Xian. As Freak who stabbed Qin Xian in the rear naturally became his enemy. He was also one of the reasons why Han Sen was miserable. When learning Qin Xian was stabbed, Son of Heaven not only had Han Sen beaten up but also let everyone know that whoever would dare to do business with Han would become his enemy for life. "I hunted it myself." Han Sen stared back coldly, fist clenched but standing still. Not only had Son of Heaven gained a lot of geno points, but he also had collected many beast souls. Since he had help from his gang, Han Sen wouldn't be able to touch the guy even with his best effort. Even with his sacred blood armor, he would be beaten to death before he approached Son of Heaven. God's sanctuary was different from the Alliance in that there was no law at all. Power was everything. Han Sen would only die in vain. Plus, Son of Heaven was said to be of prominent origin in the Alliance. Even if Han Sen were killed by him in the Alliance, Son of Heaven might not be subject to legal sanctions. Han Sen was not afraid of death. But if he died, what about his mother and sister? If I find out that someone dares to sell to you, I'll make sure you both die in pain. Son of Heaven looked around and rode away. As freak, don't make trouble. Or else I don't mind teaching you another lesson. Luo Tianyang smirked at Han Sen before following the gang on a black wildebeest. Han Sen watched the gang going away with fire burning in his eyes. He picked up the copper-toothed beast quietly and walked towards steel armor shelter, with everyone watching him with derision. Stronger, I need to become stronger. With scorching anger in his chest, Han Sen knew he was far too weak to fight the gang on his own. The black crystal, however, was his biggest opportunity. Son of Heaven, just get rid of him for good, Luo Tianyang said coldly. Son of Heaven smiled and said, Qin Xian is a stubborn girl. She doesn't like people to intervene in her business. Since she did not kill Han Sen, she might be upset if I did. What an unwise woman, another henchman of Son of Heaven, Peerless Sword, said. It's her honor that you, bro, would chase her, while she just puts on airs. If it weren't for you, I would have killed her already. Don't put Qin Xian down. She is quite something in both God's Sanctuary and the Alliance. If she becomes mine, it will be a huge advantage to me. Son of Heaven said grimly, end of discussion. We need to get to Sunset Slope before Fist Guy's gang. That sacred blood creature has to be ours. Han Sen returned to his room, tied the copper-toothed beast to a cage and put the black crystal in front of it. The beast gobbled up the black crystal greedily. After an entire day, Han Sen noticed some changes to the copper-toothed beast. Its fur had been gray-black like a wild boar, and its fangs had been bronze. Now its fur also started to show a bit of bronze luster, and the fangs had become brighter in color. However, this was not a true mutant copper-toothed beast, which ought to look like a bronze statue. Although this one did show some bronze luster, it was still quite different from a mutant one. It seems that the evolution from a primitive creature to a mutant creature is a more complex process than from ordinary to primitive, so it requires more time than one day, Han Sen pondered. After more than 2 days, its bronze color thickened, but the copper-toothed beast still didn't look like it was going to evolve anytime soon. Han Sen had to let the beast evolve at its own pace, and go kill some primitive creatures for money. Plus, he could also use some primitive geno points. Even if one didn't choose to use the primitive geno points to complete evolution, the more primitive geno points one gained, the stronger the body would become. And the same went for ordinary and mutant geno points. If one could max out on ordinary, primitive and mutant geno points, one's physical conditions would still be far beyond the average level, even without evolution. With the black crystal, it wouldn't be difficult for Han Sen to max out on all 4 types of geno points. At the moment, he wanted to max out on the other 3 before he focused on sacred geno points. Han Sen left his room and walked into the shelter, feeling slightly different. Today the street seemed to be a lot less crowded than usual. What's going on? Han Sen walked past the plaza and found fewer stalls there than usual as well. People there were all whispering something to each other. Han Sen listened for a while and started to figure out what had happened. A few days ago, someone had spotted a new sacred blood creature near the sunset slope. Somehow the 3 gangs in steel armor shelter all found out about it and gathered at the slope, but the outcome was terrible. The sacred blood creature ran free while a lot of men were killed. Today, Qin Xian, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy had reached an agreement to hunt the sacred blood creature together. They also recruited a lot of lone wolves and smaller groups, forming the largest campaign in steel armor shelter in recent years. The 3 gangs were determined to kill this creature. Han Sen suddenly had an idea, so he turned around and ran out of the city. When there was no one around, he summoned the Black Beetle beast soul and covered himself in armor. After running for 2 hours, he came to a stone hill west of Sunset Slope. Having finally climbed to the top of the hill, Han Sen took a look in the direction of Sunset Slope. Among thousands of people fighting and yelling, there was a monster with the head of a cow, the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. It was holding a double-edged golden axe and pushing its way through the crowd. No one could withstand the fierce blow of its axe. Han Sen happened to see the monster swinging the axe at Son of Heaven. Who even had his blood-red sword, Son of Heaven did not dare to block the axe. He stepped on his own mount and leaped back a few feet. Roar! The monster's double-edged axe hit the triceratops-like beast soul mount and split it in 2 halves. That broke Son of Heaven's heart. A mutant beast soul mount was very rare, with the same value as a small interstellar spaceship. How is this sacred blood creature so strong? Han Sen was shocked. The sacred blood creature ran and killed thousands of people in a flash, and no one was able to fight back. Even people as strong as Qin Xian, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy didn't dare to engage in a frontal attack. Hit by all sorts of alloy arrows and beast soul arrows, the monster still didn't even get a scratch. When it swung the axe, no one could get close. Such a mighty creature corresponded to Han Sen's impression of a sacred blood creature. The sacred blood Black Beetle he killed was way too weak compared to this monster. It was only a little stronger than an ordinary Black Beetle and didn't even feel like a sacred blood creature. People were expecting to trap the sacred blood creature, but now a key buffer was lost as the Mount of Son of Heaven was killed. The sacred blood creature was charging madly, waving the golden double-edged axe and leaving screams, blood, and limbs behind. It took it only moments to rush out of the siege to the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, it even smugly turned around and stood on its back legs, mooing like a cow before it ran into the mountain. F***K. It wants to escape. Son of Heaven furiously summoned a green eagle-shaped beast soul, which turned into a green iron bow in his hand. Then he summoned a fiery beast soul in the shape of a giant six-winged wasp as his arrow. Seeing the arrow, Qin Xian and Fist Guy exclaimed, a sacred blood beast soul of a six-winged wasp. They had joined force with Son of Heaven in hunting the sacred blood six-winged wasp. Son of Heaven was the one who had launched the final blow. They just didn't expect him to be so lucky to have gained its beast soul. There were less than 10 beast souls known to people in the entire steel armor shelter, and many were left by those who already had evolved and gone to Second God's sanctuary. Son of Heaven, stop. It's a beast soul that can only be used once. If you fail to kill it. Luo Tianyang wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Son of Heaven had already shot the sacred blood beast soul arrow with a full draw. The arrow turned into a red lightning bolt flying towards the sacred blood creature. Bang! The sacred blood creature felt the imminent danger and turned around. The wasp arrow shot into its chest and exploded, bursting open its flesh. The monster fell to the ground, losing its vitality as its internal organs and blood sprayed out. How dare you kill my mount? There is no way I'd let you live after doing that, Son of Heaven yelled loftily, standing like a king, leaving everyone in shock. While proud to see the crowd being impressed, including Qin Xian, Son of Heaven suddenly saw a green shadow shooting down from the sky into the dying sacred blood creature and ended its life. A golden figure immediately rushed down from the stone hill nearby and approached the sacred blood creature. Lifting the golden double-edged axe to his shoulder, the mysterious figure ran towards the mountain in a flash. $. Su Xiaoqiao recognized Han Sen's unique golden armor in no time and called out loud. Han Sen was hiding on the stone hill when the sacred blood creature charged in his direction. As he was deciding whether to retreat, he saw Son of Heaven shoot down the sacred blood creature. Anger surged and Han Sen rushed down the stone hill while summoning the bronze crescent spear. He shot the spear at the monster and hit it in the wounded chest, killing the dying creature. Sacred blood bloody slayer killed. Sacred blood beast soul bloody slayer gained. Eat the flesh of bloody slayer to gain 0 to 10 sacred geno points randomly. The voice in the back of his head brought him intense joy. He had just gained another sacred blood beast soul. His luck was too good to believe. However, Han Sen did not have time to celebrate. The body of the bloody slayer was too large for him to take away, but what he could take away was the giant golden axe. The creatures in God's sanctuary could produce certain treasures through special means. People called these treasures gears. Although gears were just like solid items and could not be summoned like beast souls, they could perform as well as beast souls if they were produced by advanced creatures. The bloody slayer was peerless when holding the golden axe, and the axe could easily break normal beast soul weapons and beast soul mounts, so it proved to be an excellent sacred blood gear. Han Sen's goal was to get the golden axe, and the beast soul of bloody slayer was completely unexpected loot. Watching Han Sen running on the mountain with the golden axe, everyone was stunned. Motherf asterisk hashtag Ker. Son of Heaven let out a raging roar when he realized what had happened. With a black wildebeest summoned as his mount, he rode madly in Han Sen's direction. Behind him, his gang all raced off on their own mounts to chase Han Sen, roaring and rebuking him. Han Sen did not expect the golden axe to be so terribly heavy. With 8 sacred geno points, he was already a lot stronger than before, yet he could still barely walk with the axe, not to mention run. The bloody slayer made it seem so light. How could I run off with such a heavy weapon? Hansen looked back and could already see Son of Heaven and his gang only half a mile from him. Although it was too heavy to carry, Han Sen would never leave behind such an excellent sacred blood gear. He suddenly thought of his newly gained beast soul of the bloody slayer, took a look at it and suddenly cheered up. Type of sacred blood bloody slayer's beast soul, shape-shifting. Without thinking, Han Sen summoned the beast soul of bloody slayer and the majestic shadow galloped out, looking just like the monster, only missing the giant axe. The beast soul ran towards Han Sen and was instantly integrated with him. His body was transformed into a bloody slayer and the Black Beetle armor changed its shape accordingly, still fully covering Han Sen's body as a bloody slayer. After all, beast soul armor was not as rigid as man-made ones and could change according to the shape of the body. After shape-shifting, Han Sen felt so energetic that the golden axe was now nothing to him. Running with 4 hoofs, he also became incredibly fast. Han Sen surged up the mountain at full speed and disappeared, far outpacing the gang. Everyone was speechless, as everything happened so fast. Many smirked as they watched Son of Heaven and others who were still chasing Han Sen. #T. Who was that guy? He's got some nerve jumping into the boiling pot. And what loot? In addition to the golden axe, he gained a sacred blood beast soul. Can you imagine how much it must be worth? You think you could buy a sacred blood beast soul just with money? Haha, Son of Heaven must be so mad. A sacred blood beast soul. It would have been his but was taken away. The arrow he used seemed like a one-off sacred blood beast soul. And what did he get in return for such investment? LOL. I'm just afraid Son of Heaven will lose his mind. Didn't expect there to be a sacred blood beast soul. How lucky that guy is. He could never have killed the monster alone. And a dozen sacred blood creatures may not even render a single beast soul. It just happened that he gained everything with the last hit. Who was that guy indeed? Is there such a person in steel armor shelter? I heard someone call him Doll, but not sure. Doll. Interesting name. After less than an hour, Son of Heaven returned gloomily with his gang, but people already knew it was impossible to find someone on the winding mountain trails. Son of Heaven immediately questioned Su Xiaoqiao when he got back. His exclamation, "dollar," had been a mistake. Su Xiaoqiao had no choice but to tell him everything about how he met Han Sen, which wasn't very helpful since all he had was a name, Dollar. Son of Heaven didn't fully believe him, but couldn't do much as Su Xiaoqiao was in Qin Xian's gang. He bitterly led his gang back to Steel Armor Shelter and locked down the shelter, swearing to find Dollar and cut him into pieces. Most people did not learn the name Dollar, while Doll became popular. For a while, Doll, Son of Heaven, Sacred Blood Creature, and Sacred Blood Beast Soul became the most popular topics in Steel Armor Shelter. Han Sen was digging a pit at the foot of the mountain, planning to bury the giant golden axe there. Although he escaped the manhunt of Son of Heaven by shape-shifting into the Blood Slayer, there was a limit to how long he could shape-shift. As one of the most powerful beast soul types, shape-shifting beast souls could directly impart significant changes to a human body, which could be unbearable for those with weak genes. The stronger the creature one wanted to shape-shift into, the more geno points and bodies were needed. In general, for primitive beast souls, the number of minutes the body could withstand the shape-shifting was equal to the number of primitive geno points gained. In addition, one mutant geno point could support 10 minutes of shape-shifting with primitive beast souls, and in turn, 10 primitive geno points could support 1 minute of shape-shifting with mutant beast souls. Now Han Sen had 8 sacred geno points, which could last him only 8 minutes for shape-shifting as a blood slayer. Even counting the ordinary, primitive and mutant genes he had gained altogether, he could shape-shift for less than 10 minutes. It was enough for escaping, but if he were to fight a gang of people, he could only kill 1 or 2 before his time was up. No one could see a sacred blood beast soul if it wasn't summoned, yet the golden axe could not be turned invisible. The person he mainly had offended was Son of Heaven, yet the campaign was a joint one, and the axe should have been the mutual gain of all 3 gangs. Hence, Han Sen had pissed off all of them and could only bury the axe in that spot for the time being. If I could sell the giant golden axe, it should easily bring at least 2 million. Han Sen was still excited after burying the axe. A sacred blood gear was not as valuable as a sacred blood beast soul, but still considered almost priceless. If he could sell it, 2 million would be a small amount. As for the sacred blood beast soul, Han Sen had not even thought of selling. This was the bedrock of his survival and success in God's sanctuary, and it would be like killing the goose that lays the golden egg if he were to sell it. Returning to Steel Armor Shelter, he saw Luo Tianyang guarding the gate with others. Everyone who tried to enter the shelter was interrogated. Can you even see what beast souls I have? Han Sen had no fear as he had already buried the golden axe. A young man at the gate stopped him and wanted to do a body search on him, while Luo Tianyang said, "Why waste any time on that scumbag? How is it even possible that he would be Dollar?" #K off. The young man pushed Han Sen away and turned to search other people. Han Sen looked at Luo Tianyang with a sneer and went into the shelter. Everyone in the street was talking about what had happened at Sunset Slope. Listening to people calling him Doll, Han Sen thought, "Damn Su Xiaoqiao. Who told you to call me Doll?" He was happy to know that Son of Heaven was furious and strode back to his room. In another room, Su Xiaoqiao stood in front of Qin Xian, almost in tears. Xian, you need to believe me. I've told you everything I know. I really did not know Dollar, but only saw him once in Zephyr Valley and bought some swift mantises from him, which I gave to my brothers as gifts. Just ask around if you don't believe me. They even helped carry the mantises back from the valley. I am not blaming you. I just want you to contact Dollar, tell him I am willing to buy his sacred blood beast soul and gear, and ask him how much he wants, Qin Xian said quietly. But I really do not know where he is. Su Xiaoqiao said sadly. Then go find him. Don't let anyone know about this and go look for him secretly. If you manage the task, I'll reward you. Qin Xian showed Su Xiaoqiao out after she gave the order, not waiting for his reply. After he left, Qin Xian frowned to herself, who could Dollar be? Is he someone in Fist Guy's gang? Or was the whole thing orchestrated by Son of Heaven? If he really is on his own, can I get him on my side? If I can't, it would also be nice to purchase the sacred blood beast soul and gear. Almost at the same time, Fist Guy sent his men to look for Dollar in secret, trying to buy the sacred blood beast soul and gear from him. Although it was a joint action, the only one who suffered a loss was Son of Heaven. If it had not been for his sacred blood wasp arrow, the bloody slayer would have run away and there would have been nothing for Qin Xian and Fist Guy. Now they could share some flesh of the bloody slayer, so it had gone well for them. However, Son of Heaven lost a mutant beast soul mount and a sacred blood wasp arrow, while being robbed of the sacred blood beast soul and gear. Anyone in his place would have been exasperated. The entire steel armor shelter was looking for Dollar, yet no one connected him to Ass Freak. Son of Heaven also put a price on his head, and even offered to pay a reward for any substantive information. The price was so good that even Han Sen wanted to offer himself for the reward. Primitive green-scaled beast flesh eaten. 1 primitive geno point gained. Han Sen squatted in the bushes, watching a deep pond near him while chewing meat jerky made from the green-scaled beast. Up until this point, he had gained 91 ordinary geno points, 26 primitive geno points, 0 mutant geno points and 8 sacred geno points. The copper-toothed beast was still slowly evolving, so Han Sen could only go out to hunt some primitive creatures, hoping to gain more primitive geno points. Because the Black Beetle armor would draw too much attention, he could only go deep into the mountains where nobody goes, fearing that Son of Heaven would know where he was. Fortunately, God's sanctuary was so vast that there were many places where humans had never set foot, so it was rather easy for Han Sen to disappear. While staring at the deep pond, Han Sen suddenly heard a distant voice of a man and immediately tensed up. Soon, Han Sen saw a young man walking towards the pond in ragged clothes. He was covered with cuts and bruises all over and looked extremely tired. Friend, there are iron-toothed crocodiles in the pool, Han Sen came out of the bushes and cried from afar. He meant well in warning the young man, but was also afraid that he might alert the crocodiles that he wanted to hunt. This young man looked very tired and seriously injured. If he drank from the pond without knowing the crocodiles were there, he could have gotten killed by the iron-toothed crocodiles hiding under the water. The young man saw Han Sen and became ecstatic. What is this place? And how do I get to Glory Shelter? He asked, staring at Han Sen. Glory Shelter? Han Sen hesitated, looking at the young man strangely. We are in Teaks Mountains north of Steel Armor Shelter, and I do not know where the Glory Shelter you mentioned is. I have come so far that I'm now in the territory of another shelter, the young man whispered to himself, looked up at Han Sen, and said with an almost commanding tone. Take me to the shelter. Han Sen frowned, as the tone of the young man wasn't very polite. Quietly he said, you go south from here. If you don't walk too slowly, you can reach the shelter before dark. I have to hunt, so I can't accompany you. Han Sen was preparing to go back into the grass, not expecting the young man to suddenly hit him in the back. Losing balance and falling to the ground, Han Sen knocked his head on a rock and started to bleed. What are you doing? Han Sen covered his wound and stood up, glaring at the young man. All I want is obedience, not bulls *T. Take me to the shelter. The young man looked at Han Sen coldly. F*#KU. Han Sen summoned his bronze crescent spear and poked it at him. Rubbish basic spear skills taught in integrated compulsory education. Even though my beast souls were all ruined on the way here, scum like you can't compare to me. The young man looked at Han Sen contemptuously, raised one palm and slashed it at Han Sen's spear. The young man's hands looked nothing like hands of a man, but rather like they were sculpted out of a whole piece of white jade, giving off an incredible sheen. Crack. The beast soul spear was cut in half by his palm as easily as a steel knife cutting through wood. Hypergeno art. With only half of the spear in his hand, Han Sen was horrified. Science and technology were of no use in God's sanctuary, but ancient martial arts played an unexpectedly important role. With all the Geno points gained, humans were able to perform some mythical ancient martial arts in the real world. Nonetheless, it wasn't the so-called chi but the power of genes that powered the ancient martial arts. So, the more Geno points gained, the more effective ancient martial arts would be. The research showed that ancient martial arts could stimulate and bring out the potential of genes, offering extraordinary power to mankind. A new type of martial arts was developed called Hypergeno arts. Hypergeno arts were deeply rooted in ancient martial arts, full of mysteries that couldn't be explained by science. Their practice methods were mostly monopolized by the upper class. The most advanced Hypergeno arts were the least accessible. For those who graduated from a public school of integrated compulsory education like Han Sen, Hypergeno arts were never an option. Only the advanced schools would teach basic Hypergeno arts. If the process of gaining Geno points was compared to turning mud into steel, then Hypergeno arts could decide whether the steel was to be made into knives and guns or simply left as a piece of metal. Acquiring genes to make the body evolve was merely acquiring the material, while Hypergeno arts taught one to use the material effectively. You know a lot for the scum you are. The young man looked at Han Sen indifferently. This is your last chance. Lead the way or die. Again, he raised the jade-like palm as if he was an executioner about to perform his duty. If Han Sen didn't comply, he would cut his head off. Kiss my ass. Han Sen summoned the Black Beetle armor and covered himself, kicking the young man with a leg sweep. You asked for it. The young man's face darkened, his jade-like palm chopping towards Han Sen's leg. Clank. Han Sen's leg was knocked away, and there was a white mark on the golden armor. The young man was also forced to step back from Han Sen's kick. Surprised, he looked greedily at Han Sen's armor. It didn't break under my jade skin. Must be sacred blood beast soul armor then. A scum like you having such a nice thing is just a gift sent from heaven. Hand over your armor and I'll spare your life. Han Sen turned around and launched another kick in rage. The young man grabbed Han Sen's leg and twisted it, wrestled him down and came down hard on his back with a knee. Ah! Han Sen uttered a scream, feeling his spine about to break. Scum is always scum, even with a sacred blood beast soul. The young man, named Xuelongyan, continuously hit Han Sen on the back of head, knocking his head into a rock. He cried ferociously, surrender the sacred blood beast soul. It's not meant for scum like you. Asshole. Han Sen's blood was burning. He suddenly raised his head and butted Xuelongyan's face with his helmet. Blood splashed from Xuelongyan's nose. He covered his nose and backed off. Han Sen regained freedom and immediately summoned the Bloody Slayer. The moment he turned into the monstrous figure, he threw himself at Xuelongyan. Xuelongyan kept chopping at Han Sen, while Han Sen ignored all the attacks from his tough hands and held him down tightly, the cow-shaped head knocking on his head. Who is scum? Who the F*** #K is scum? Han Sen knocked madly on Xuelongyan's head over and over again. While Xuelongyan was struggling to kick Han Sen, the latter ignored him and rammed his face with the cow head. It didn't take long before Xuelongyan's body went limp. When Han Sen finally calmed down, he was already dead, with his face smashed in like a hunk of meat. With the body of a bloody slayer and sacred blood beast soul armor, even those who practiced Hypergeno arts couldn't resist such brutal impact. Han Sen let go of the body, and Xuelongyan fell to the floor like a pool of mud. Having dismissed the beast souls, Han Sen felt a severe pain. It was hurting so much in a few spots that it felt like his bones were broken. Han Sen dreaded to think what could have happened. He was injured so badly, even with the shape-shifting and armor. Xuelongyan's Hypergeno art was really quite something. If he had the same beast souls, Han Sen wouldn't be a match for him. Looking at the dead body, Han Sen hesitated and then searched the body. There was a wallet, with no cash but several crystal credit cards in it, deluxe ones with high credit lines. He also found a memory chip. After some thought, Han Sen destroyed the wallet and credit cards and threw them, along with the dead body, into the deep pond, while keeping the memory chip. Several iron-toothed crocodiles emerged from the water and snapped at the dead body. Soon even the bones were gone. Han Sen was relieved and turned away. Too injured to keep hunting, Han Sen returned to steel armor shelter, enduring the pain. The gang of Son of Heaven were still looking for Dollar, and the bounty had been raised. Unfortunately, no one had any interaction with Han Sen, so no one would know Dollar was actually as freak. People were still talking about Dollar on the streets. Hansen went all the way back to his room and checked out the copper-toothed beast, which had turned bronze in most parts, although the shade was still lighter than a true mutant copper-toothed beast. It probably would take more time for the evolution to complete. Teleporting out of God's sanctuary, Hansen went to see a doctor. Multiple fractures of the bone were diagnosed, and it took the doctor a long time to fix all of them. Fortunately, Hansen still had the 10,000 he earned from Su Xiaoqiao, or else he wouldn't even have been able to afford the medical bills. Back home from the hospital, Hansen closed the door and inserted the memory chip into a smart gadget, trying to find out Xue Longyan's identity. Able to cross the mountains and swamps to reach steel armor shelter and having practiced a hyper-geno art that looked very advanced, Xue Longyan would be very a formidable opponent if he still had his beast souls with him and had not been injured. The smart gadget displayed the contents of the memory chip and Hansen only had to look for a while before he became wild with joy. Hyper-Geno Arts, it's a tutorial for Hyper-Geno Arts. Hansen almost laughed out loud. The hologram stored in the chip was a naked woman making odd movements while reciting arcane incantations. With each movement, she would also give some explanation. Although the woman was extremely beautiful, Hansen was completely attracted to what she was talking about and had no other thoughts. Jade skin. Isn't this the Hypo-Geno art used by Xue Longyan? Hansen had seen the power of jade skin when Xue Longyan used it, and became even more happy. Having locked himself in the room for 48 hours, Hansen finally memorized everything in the chip and destroyed it, as it could become a pitfall in the future. After watching the jade skin tutorial, Hansen had a stronger sense that Xue Longyan must have been somebody significant. Hansen began to practice jade skin as he was recovering. He had thought before about buying a tutorial of a hyper-Geno art, after he had earned some money. However, the ones that could be bought were all cheap, unlike jade skin, which he could tell was premium. Knowing that practicing jade skin might eventually expose him, Hansen still decided to begin. If he missed jade skin, he might never have the opportunity to practice a premium hyper-Geno art. Having practiced for several days, Hansen felt his body had become cooler. And his body temperature was indeed 35 degrees Fahrenheit lower than normal. It was not a discomfort, but rather a refreshing feeling. Hansen felt more fit, as if his body cells were full of energy. His body temperature didn't change further as he kept on practicing. Hansen became more and more fit and his skin more and more smooth. Hansen, what have you been up to lately? It's been a while since we met. Let's hang out sometime. The hologram of a smiling handsome long-haired man about Hansen's age popped out from the comlink. Where are we going? Hansen was delighted to see Zhang Danfeng, the long-haired guy. They grew up together, and he was son of Mr. Zhang, the lawyer. Come out first. Han Hao and Xue Shi are also with me, and we are almost there, Zhang Danfeng said. Sure. Hansen nodded and went out the door. There was a small private jet parked outside, and Zhang Danfeng was waving to him from the driver's seat. Hansen got in and saw a girl and a guy talking in the back seats. The girl named Xue Shi was very pretty and gentle. And the guy was Han Hao, son of Hansen's fat aunt. Hansen's aunt was an aggressive woman, so Han Hao inherited her family name. The four young people had all grown up together. However, after Hansen's father's accident, he could only go to integrated compulsory education, while the rest were in private schools. Hansen nodded to Han Hao and Xue Shi and sat in the co-pilot seat. Han Hao took a look at him and continued to talk to Xue Shi, ignoring Hansen. Xue Shi, you should see it. Dollar just waved his hand and turned into a monster with horse legs, a human upper body and a cow head in golden armor. Son of Heaven and his gang could do nothing but watch him gallop away. Hansen was somewhat surprised to see Han Hao sputtering on. He did not know Han Hao was also randomly sent to the steel armor shelter. Han Hao was 3 months younger than him, so he should have just had his birthday and gained access to God's sanctuary. For unknown reasons, if those under 16 were teleported, their bodies would suffer irreversible damage. So according to the Alliance laws, one must be 16 years old to be teleported to God's sanctuary, regardless of social status. Hey Frenzy, where are we going? Hansen asked Zhang Danfeng. Although Zhang Danfeng was a good-looking man, he became crazy whenever he was in a fight, hence the nickname. Zhang Danfeng's face lit up, Starlight Martial Hall. My idol Tang Zhenliu's going to be in an exhibition fight held there. He was the chosen last year, and his broadsword skills are so fierce. Zhang Danfeng was full of yearning. In this era where everyone was focused on evolution, stars no longer came from acting, singing, sports and esports, but from fighting. In God's sanctuary, once every year the martial hall of each shelter would open at the same time, and those in the top 100 could have their names on the martial stele in the martial hall. The champions from each shelter would be eligible to compete among themselves. And the same happened in all 4 phases of God's sanctuary. The top 10 from each phase could have their names on the sacred stele, which was public to everyone in the same phase, and gain the title, the Chosen. And the 10 chosen would become the hottest stars of the year. In recent years, Qin Xian had always been the champion of steel armor shelter, but her name was never on the sacred stele, so she was never among the top 10 of First God's sanctuary. Ranking number 5 last year, Tang Junliu was known for his fierce broadsword skills. He was very popular among young people and even more well-liked than the top 4. He was paid as high as $10 million for any exhibition match. Knowing his popularity, Han Sen was nevertheless shocked when he saw a full house at Starlight Martial Hall, which could accommodate more than 100,000 people. Many crazy fans were holding signs and calling out Tang Junliu's name. When he appeared, a girl was so excited that she fainted. If I could have my name on the sacred stele like Tang Junliu once in my life, then I'd know I've lived. Zhang Danfeng said admiringly. You will frenzy. Han Sen smiled and said, watching the young people around him going crazy for Tang Junliu's appearance. It's so hard. I have entered God's sanctuary for 3 months already. Although I bought some primitive flesh and a primitive beast soul, it's still difficult for me to hunt any mutant creatures. If I could buy a mutant beast soul, it would be much easier. But even if I had the money, people wouldn't necessarily sell their mutant beast souls. Zhang Danfeng shook his head with a wry smile. Han Sen thought to himself regretfully, the only thing that could be brought from God's sanctuary to the real world was a beast soul, while it can only be used but not traded there. Otherwise I could produce mutant creatures and would gain some mutant beast souls eventually, which could be really helpful to Frenzy. Then I have better luck than you, Danfeng. I just entered God's sanctuary and have already gained a mutant beast soul. Such a pity you are not in steel armor shelter, or else we could hunt together and I could help you, Han Hao said proudly. You've gained a mutant beast soul already. Tell the truth, did you hunt it or pay for it? Zhang Danfeng cried, staring at Han Hao. Of course I hunted it myself, Han Hao said loudly. Han Sen laughed to himself. Since he was a kid, Han Hao had always raised his voice when he lied. His parents probably bought him the mutant beast soul with an enormous amount of money. The cheapest mutant beast soul would cost millions, and good ones tens of millions. So that's why his relatives were after the old house. It was a huge expense for them. Although the company had earned a lot of money, they had probably spent it all by now. Tang Junliu was indeed awesome. Although it was just an exhibition fight, his broadsword skills were so swift and fierce that his broadsword almost became invisible. After watching for a while, Han Sen knew that Tang Junliu must have practiced premium hyper-geno arts and learned his weapon skills from masters, and he was no competition to Tang Junliu. Tang Junliu won the fight and summoned a beast soul to perform, shape-shifting into a 3-meter-tall Tyrannosaurus creature and smashing a huge stone with its head, arousing a burst of screaming. Sacred blood beast soul of raging Dementor. I would do anything for a beast soul like this. Zhang Danfeng stared at Tang Junliu, who turned into a monster with a watering mouth. This is nothing. This beast soul is nothing like the $1 has. Han Hao sputtered about dollar as if it were himself. It would take a showdown to tell. Tang Junliu was Danfeng's idol, so he was upset to hear that. I don't know how good dollar was, but his sacred blood beast soul was robbed from others, and it was not a chivalric act. Even if he had a great beast soul, he would not be comparable to Junliu. Han Sen blushed with shame and thought, oh Frenzy, you didn't know what a hard time I was having. How could I let go of an opportunity like that? Not to mention Son of Heaven was my enemy. Han Sen was hesitating whether or not to tell them that dollar was himself but decided not to. It wouldn't do them any good, after all. Han Sen kept practicing Jade Skin and recovering after he returned home. Every 2 days he went to God's sanctuary to check on the copper-toothed beast. It took the beast half a month from the time it swallowed the black crystal to become a mutant creature, but it was still the size of an ordinary copper-toothed beast, while the mutant copper-toothed beasts Han Sen had seen were twice that size. In addition to the size, the one he evolved into wasn't much stronger either, not even close to a true mutant one. Han Sen took out his alloy dagger and slashed the beast on the neck, but caused no damage at all. It was his dagger that chipped. So it is somewhat different from an ordinary one. Han Sen shapeshifted into a bloody slayer and snapped its neck by force. Mutant copper-toothed beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat its flesh to gain 0 to 10 mutant geno points. The sound in his mind overjoyed Han Senator. It might look different than a wild mutant copper-toothed beast, but it was fine as long as it was indeed a mutant creature. Now what was troubling him was how to sell this mutant copper-toothed beast. He really needed the money, or else he could just eat it to gain mutant geno points. It is too dangerous for me to sell it showing up as dollar, now that the entire shelter is looking for him. But it would also be troublesome if I were to sell it using my own true identity. Han Sen still decided to use Dollar's name after some hesitation. Su Xiaoqiao was depressed these days. Qin Xian asked him to find Dollar, but he didn't know Dollar any more than she did, so what was he supposed to do? Early in the morning, Su Xiaoqiao was tripped by something and fell flat on his face. Who is this #Cur that placed a stone in front of my room? He's dead if I find out. Even more depressed than before, Xiaoqiao saw that there was something under the stone. He took a closer look and found a note and a bundle. The note said, goods worth 50,000 delivered. We are square. If you want more, come to Zephyr Valley tomorrow. Cash only. Although there was no signature, a coin was drawn at the lower left corner, making clear who it was from. Dollar. Su Xiaoqiao was thrilled but didn't make a sound this time. Looking around and seeing no one, he took the bundle and note and closed the door. Su Xiaoqiao carefully opened the bundle and saw a long strip of meat jerky the size of 2 or 3 bites. Su Xiaoqiao chewed up the meat jerky and swallowed. Mutant copper-toothed beast flesh eaten. 1 mutant geno point gained. The voice in his mind surprised Xiaoqiao, mutant copper-toothed beast flesh. So it was hunted by Dollar. He must have more now that he asked me to bring cash to Zephyr Valley. Thinking of this, he got even more excited that he could bring Qin Xian's message to Dollar and buy mutant flesh from him at the same time. Early in the morning, Su Xiaoqiao set off to Zephyr Valley. He waited from early morning to noon but didn't see Dollar coming. #T, he must have fooled me. Su Xiaoqiao was so upset that he was preparing to leave, but then heard someone say, you brought cash. Shocked, Su Xiaoqiao turned around and saw Dollar in golden armor emerging from below the ground. Brother, did you hide there all morning? Su Xiaoqiao said, staring at Han Sen. I've been hiding here since last night. You know what's going on right now, and I have to be careful, Han Sen said casually. I admire you Dollar, but you really have nothing to worry about. I'm so grateful you would sell me mutant flesh and would never betray you. Su Xiaoqiao gave Han Sen a thumbs up. It was incredible that he could stay underground for the whole night and the entire morning. It must have been so uncomfortable. Cut the crap. Did you bring the money? Han Sen pulled out another bundle from the pit where he was hiding and placed it in front of Xiaoqiao. Su Xiaoqiao looked inside the bundle, which was full of the same meat jerky he had eaten yesterday. There must have been more than 5 pounds of it. He excitedly asked, Dollar, did you make all this from the mutant copper-toothed beast? Yep. An entire mutant copper-toothed beast is right here. 2 million, and no bargaining, Han Sen said. Well, 2 million is fine. Su Xiaoqiao handed 2 stacks of 10,000 notes to Han Sen, but doubted whether the entire beast was really there, as there should have been more meat. Han Sen noticed his doubt, took the money and said, this meat jerky is made in traditional ways, so it shrank a bit. Rest assured that the whole beast is here. Han Sen made the copper-toothed beast into meat jerky so that no one would wonder why the beast was so tiny. Of course I trust you. Su Xiaoqiao paused and said, Dollar, you should know that I work for Qin Xian. She has a message for you. She wants to buy the sacred blood beast soul and golden axe you gained the other day, and she could offer you a good price. Oh, what is the price? Han Sen was interested in selling the golden axe, as it was not that portable. He hadn't found a chance to use it, so it was still buried. You will have to figure this out yourselves. I'm just the messenger, Su Xiaoqiao shrugged and said. If you meet with Qin Xian, tell her if she really wants to buy it, she can name a price and you can bring it to me, Han Sen said lightly. It was too risky for her to meet Qin Xian. Han Sen took back the beast's soul armor and returned to steel armor shelter. When he was entering the gate, he met an acquaintance. Sen. Han Hao was surprised to see him. Han Hao, you know freak. Han Hao's companions all recognized Han Sen and looked at Han Hao strangely. No, wrong guy. Let's go. Han Hao paused and looked embarrassed. Without saying hello, he walked past Han Sen. Han Hao hadn't expected Han Sen to be in the same shelter, nor that he was also the infamous freak. If word got out that he was Han Sen's cousin, Han Hao couldn't imagine what Son of Heaven Qin Xian would do to him. Han Sen smiled wryly and did not expose Han Hao's lie. Since Han Hao didn't want anything to do with him, why would he do his cousin any harm? With 2 million on him, Han Sen left God's sanctuary and went back home. He asked Mr. Zhang to help with the legal procedures regarding the old house to avoid any further disputes with his relatives. After that, Han Sen felt a lot more relaxed. Everything would be taken care of and life would only get better. When he earned more money, Han Yen could go to a private school, where she could get a much better education than he did. In some elite schools, she could even learn hyper-geno arts and have a much better start. To enter an elite school, however, her family must be aristocratic. So Han Sen must complete one evolution and gain the title. That would be a piece of cake for me. I could even have the title of Sacred Blood Aristocrat if I want. Han Sen's spirits were high. Brother, you here? Han Yen, in floral pajamas and holding a doll in her arms, poked her head through the door and searched for Han Sen. Seeing Han Sen sitting on the bed, she ran over and leaned against him with the doll. Naughty girl, why are you still up? Han Sen pinched her little nose. Yen wants to listen to a story. It's been forever since you told me stories, and I've missed you so much since you've been gone. Han Yen looked at Han Sen with watery eyes. Han Sen sighed secretly. Since he graduated and entered God's sanctuary, he had almost no time for his little sister, which he felt so guilty about. I'll tell Yen a story right now. Han Sen sat Han Yen on his lap, opened a story book and read softly, Once Upon a Time. After Han Sen returned to God's sanctuary, he decided to catch a primitive creature to feed, which, incredibly, would turn to a mutant one in half a month. But Han Sen was more curious to know how long it would take for it to become a sacred blood creature, which is what he needed most. It was still relatively easy to hunt a wild mutant creature, but almost impossible to hunt a sacred blood one. Take the Bloody Slayer for example, he could never have killed it if it weren't already severely injured by Son of Heaven. The moment Han Sen left his room, he was pulled away by someone. Han Sen turned and saw Han Hao, who pulled him to a remote spot. After confirming there was no one nearby, Han Hao said, How did you cause such trouble? You haven't even been here long, and you've managed to piss off gangs of both Qin Xian and Son of Heaven. I didn't mean to, Han Sen said casually. I do not care. You are on your own for the stupid things you did. You are not allowed to say that I am your cousin or that you know me in front of others. I just started here and have a bright future, and will not be destroyed like you were, Han Hao said, glaring at Han Sen. Sure, I won't tell. Han Sen knew his cousin had been looking down on him since he went to integrated compulsory education, and there was no way he would support him under these circumstances. Of course, he was not obligated to either. That's settled then. Don't say you know me, Han Hao told Han Sen once again before leaving, fearing that someone might see them together. Han Sen left Steel Armor Shelter and went all the way into the mountains. He didn't plan to hunt copper-toothed beasts anymore, as he had had enough of their meat and would no longer gain primitive geno points from it. It was another primitive creature that he was going after. He could eat several and also bring back a living one to evolve. Han Sen had chosen a place called Barathrum Cave for hunting this time. It was a remote cave in the mountains, where primitive creatures, quartz scorpions, lived. Because it was so dark and narrow in Barathrum Cave, even with lighting equipment, sometimes it was still difficult to see quartz scorpions hidden in rock tunnels. If stung by these scorpions, it would take a mere 3 to 5 minutes before someone who had maxed out on primitive geno points would be poisoned to death. Therefore, few people would choose quartz scorpions as their targets. With Black Beetle armor, however, Han Sen wasn't risking much, as it was not likely that quartz scorpions could get to him. He chose quartz scorpions because, first, it was easy to hide himself from the public in the cave. And second, a quartz scorpion was only the size of a fist, so it would be easy for him to carry their bodies back, unlike the large prey which were hard to transport. Third, if he happened to gain the beast soul of a quartz scorpion, he would also make a fortune, as it was a weapon like a military knife which was poisoned and incredibly sharp. As a primitive beast soul, its price was almost as high as a mutant one. At the mouth of the cave, Han Sen made sure he was alone and summoned his armor, entering Barathrum Cave prepared. As modern lighting equipment didn't work in God's sanctuary, Han Sen brought a self-made torch, with which he could only see several feet in front of him. With mica in the rocks reflecting the light, he could hardly see the hidden scorpions. Clank! Han Sen soon felt a hit on his foot. He looked down and saw a deep blue scorpion the size of his fist stinging him on the feet with its tail. Fortunately, Han Sen's feet were also wrapped in armor, and the scorpion tail couldn't hurt him at all. Han Sen stepped on the quartz scorpion and crushed it. Primitive creature quartz scorpion killed. No beast soul gain. Eat the flesh of quartz scorpion to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points. Han Sen picked up the dead scorpion, put it into a prepared bag, and walked further into the cave with the bag on his back. Protected by the Black Beetle armor, Han Sen killed all quartz scorpions he saw on the way, and there were nearly 100 scorpions in his bag after he had walked for an hour. Georgie Porgy, Pudding and Pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play, Georgie Porgy ran away. Han Sen collected the dead scorpions as he was humming a nursery rhyme. His mother had to work to support their family, and he was the one who took care of Han Yen. That's why he was used to humming nursery rhymes. Dollar. Han Sen heard the other name he had given himself when he was on a spree. Shocked, he peered in the direction where the voice came from. In the cave sat a woman in her 20s leaning against stalagmites, looking at him surprised. Qin Xian. Han Sen exclaimed. Not expecting to see this woman here, Han Sen turned around to run. Since he had stabbed her in the rear, he had had nightmares about it. Don't go. I don't care about the grudge between you and Son of Heaven. And even if I wanted to look for trouble, I wouldn't be able to, Qin Xian quickly said. Han Sen paused and looked back at Qin Xian, whose ankle was swollen and badly bruised. Clearly, she had been stung by a court scorpion. It suddenly hit Han Sen that Qin Xian must have so many treasures on her since she had been in steel armor shelter for years and wished to evolve with the maximum sacred geno points. She must have sacred blood beast souls and very many mutant beast souls. At this point she was injured, and it looked quite serious. She had so many geno points that the scorpion poison might not kill her, but her ability to fight surely had suffered, or at least she couldn't move her injured leg. Although I was the one who stabbed her, she hit me back right away and has been ruthless to me ever since. If I could blackmail her right now, that would be some compensation for my suffering these months, Han Sen thought, leering at Qin Xian. As if she could see through him, Qin Xian summoned a beast soul in the shape of a purple butterfly, which turned into a purple dagger in her hand. You know the name of this dagger? Qin Xian asked him with a smile. I don't. Han Sen noticed the gleam of the dagger, but she couldn't have summoned it for its beauty. It must be at least a mutant beast soul and even possibly a sacred blood beast soul. This dagger is the beast soul of a malicious butterfly, and it is envenomed with strong poison. You decide if your armor could block my dagger. Qin Xian was still smiling. Qin Xian couldn't see Han Sen blushing because his armor blocked his face. You worry too much. We just met and have no hard feelings between us whatsoever. Why would I try to hurt you? The sacred blood armor might not have been able to block the sacred blood dagger. Han Sen would not take the chance. Besides, they weren't really enemies either, as Qin Xian didn't do anything more than make a few threats. It was Son of Heaven and his gang that really bullied him. Qin Xian smiled and took back her dagger. I can't move. If you can take me out of the cave safely, I will pay you a generous reward. How come you came here alone? Han Sen asked, not agreeing straight away. He was curious how Qin Xian was able to come this far when there was no trace of court scorpions being hunted on the way. Originally I wanted to kill a mutant court scorpion, but it was more cunning than I thought. It started to attack me, leading other scorpions when my incense was about to burn out, so that I couldn't leave the cave. The primitive scorpions no longer feared me when the incense was gone. I was able to fight them off but was stung by a mutant court scorpion. So now it's even less likely that I can leave here. Qin Xian looked at Han Sen and said, didn't you barter with Su Xiaoqiao for money? Take me out and I'll offer you that. You were stung by a mutant court scorpion? Han Sen looked at her, horrified. If it was just a sting by a primitive court scorpion, I wouldn't have asked for help, Qin Xian said casually. Han Sen now knew it was incense that kept the court scorpions sway from Qin Xian, and she thought that he must have used the same method. What she didn't know was that he had killed all court scorpions on the way out. If she had known, she would have walked away herself. Did you not kill the mutant scorpion? Han Sen asked again. Yes, but I did not get a beast soul. No one could get the flesh either, as it's full of scorpions out there, Qin Xian said. I'll take you, not for money but for a mutant beast soul. You are too greedy. Qin Xian glanced at him. Miss Qin, for you, a mutant beast soul is nothing. Is your life not worth it? Han Sen said. All right then. Qin Xian looked at Han Sen earnestly. Amazing. You have a deal, Mississippi. Han Sen walked farther into the cave. What are you doing? Qin Xian frowned. I'll take you out after picking up the corpse of the mutant court scorpion you killed. Han Sen continued to go inside. There are so many scorpions there. Don't you need incense? Qin Xian looked at Han Sen, puzzled. Why do men need incense? Han Sen came back with a giant blue scorpion about a foot long in his hand. Qin Xian sighed after looking him up and down. I was tricked by you. You have already killed all the court scorpions out there, haven't you? Smart girl. Han Sen poured the dead scorpions from his bag, which soon piled into a heap. Although Qin Xian had guessed it, she was still surprised to see that Han Sen had killed so many scorpions. Han Sen put the corpse of the mutant scorpion in his bag first before he started to fill it with primitive scorpions. There were still a few that wouldn't fit in there, and he didn't waste those but ate all the flesh until he had cleaned them up. Primitive quartz scorpion flesh eaten. 4 primitive geno points gained. I haven't seen anyone quite like you, willing to eat such disgusting things. Qin Xian had never met someone who had such nice equipment but remained so stingy. Come on. Han Sen squatted next to Qin Xian, wanting to carry her out on his back. Since there are no scorpions anymore, I could just walk out, Qin Xian said. You have promised me a mutant beast soul and couldn't take that back anyway. Why not enjoy my service with your injured leg? Han Sen said. You are right. Why not? She bit her bottom lip, got up and carefully climbed onto the back of Han Sen. With the armor, Han Sen couldn't really enjoy the feeling of her body against his. He walked out, carrying Qin Xian, with his bag in one hand. She only weighed about 100 pounds, which was nothing for Han Sen, who had already gained quite a lot geno points. They emerged from the cave in no time. Where are you going? Asked Han Sen. Back to the shelter. Qin Xian said. Han Sen no longer spoke and carried her towards steel armor shelter. After an hour, he let her down. It is not too far away from the shelter now, and people pass by here all the time. Wait for a while, and then ask them to bring you back. Han Sen extended an empty hand to Qin Xian. Now, my mutant beast soul. I have asked Su Xiaoqiao to send a message. Would you sell me the sacred blood beast soul and gear? Qin Xian didn't hesitate before she handed over a mutant beast soul in the shape of a black cat to Han Sen. What is your offer for the golden double-edged axe? Han Sen asked. 2 million. That is a piece of sacred blood gear, while 2 million won't even get you a mutant beast soul. Han Sen frowned. Sacred blood gear is very nice, but you can't take it to the real world, while beast souls could be used outside God's sanctuary. That explains the price. If you would sell a sacred blood beast soul, I'd give you 20 million, explained Qin Xian. A mutant beast soul, plus 2 million, Han Sen said. A mutant beast soul is out of the question. I'll give you 5 million. Flesh of 2 mutant creatures and 2 million. You are asking too much. Final offer, 6 million. After all, you can't take it outside, Qin Xian said. Okay, get the money ready. I will tell Xiaoqiao when and where we trade, Han Sen said and left with his bag. You really would not consider selling the sacred blood beast soul? 20 million is just a tentative offer. We could discuss further, Qin Xian said to his back. No way. Han Sen left without pausing. Qin Xian looked at him leaving and thought, his armor was tougher than the quartz scorpion sting. It must also be a sacred blood beast soul. Who was he? He doesn't look like a soldier. She had no clue. Han Sen went back to his original look and returned to the shelter with his bag. There was no one guarding the gate anymore. They had searched for Dollar for so long and found nothing, so they had to give up. Coincidentally, Han Sen ran into Han Hao and his friends again. Nice to see you again, ass freak. You have a full bag with you. How many mutant creatures did you hunt? A young man ridiculed him. 1. Han Sen replied calmly. Huh, you are funny. Could you even hunt primitive creatures? It must be full of black beetles there, laughed the young man, leading everyone to burst into laughter. No one believed Han Sen could get a mutant creature. Han Hao, don't mistake him for anyone. If you knew him, you'd forever have bad luck. A young man patted Han Hao on the shoulder. No way I'd know as freak. Han Hao looked embarrassed. Han Sen ignored them and carried his bag back to his room. He saved the mutant quartz scorpion and was going to sell Xiaoqiao all the rest. Although he could evolve a creature into a mutant 1.5 months with the black crystal, he'd rather use the crystal to get sacred blood creatures. In the middle of the night, Han Sen placed a bag of dead quartz scorpions and a note at the door of Su Xiaoqiao's room before knocking a few times. Then he hid in an alley close by and made sure Xiaoqiao took the bag and note inside. It turned out to be a nice collaboration, and Han Sen got the 6 million promised by Qin Xian and another 80,000 for the scorpions. He went back to his room with boxes of cash and almost jumped with joy. Even when his father was still alive, he had never seen so much money at once. Han Sen left God's sanctuary with the money, since the only thing he wanted to do right now was to share the joy with his mother and sister. Their adversity had finally ended. The 2 million he earned before was all used on solving the issue of the old house, and he could eventually have the 6 million to himself, which was a totally different feeling. Although the money was not even enough for the rich to buy a luxury airplane, for Hansen it was already the most money he had seen in his life. "Mom, Yen, I have something to show you." Hansen pulled them into his room and poured the cash onto his bed. "Where did you get so much money?" Luo Sulan was first frightened instead of being surprised, fearing that her son might have done something dangerous. "Mom, I was lucky to have killed a mutant creature and gained the beast soul, so I traded it for this money." Hansen did not dare to tell the truth, afraid that Luo Sulan might get worried. He didn't dare to leak anything about the black crystal, as the precious stone may land its innocent possessor in jail. His whole family could be wiped out if word got out. Luo Sulan said ruefully, "Son, you should not have sold it. It could be of great help to you, and we could always get by." "Mom, no worries. I will have another chance. I've eaten the mutant flesh and gained mutant geno points. In the future, it'll be much easier for me to hunt, and everything will get better." But Luo Sulan still felt bad, as it was not that easy to kill a mutant creature. For ordinary people, it would be great luck to hunt one, just like winning the lottery, so there may never be a second time. "Yen is about to start school, and I'm not letting her to go to a public one like I did," Hansen said. Luo Sulan looked at her children with tears in her eyes. "It's all my fault. I didn't take good care of you. Mom, you are a great woman, and you were the one who raised us. Let me contribute a little as well." Hansen picked up Han Yen. "Yen, let's go out to eat. You can have whatever you want today." Han Yan's face lit up. "I want to eat sapphire ice cream." "Sure, let's go have sapphire ice cream." Hansen pinched Han Yan's small nose. "Sapphire ice cream is too expensive. You don't need to splurge with the money. Save it to buy some meat." Just once. Hansen went out, holding Luo Sulan's hand. "Don't tell others you have hunted a mutant creature or you sold a mutant beast soul. I don't want anything bad to happen to you," Luo Sulan urged her son. Since Hansen's father had the accident, Luo Sulan had changed. She no longer wanted Hansen to be in charge but just to be safe. "Mom, relax. I will not say a thing. You keep the money and decide what to do with it." Hansen went out of the house holding his sister with one hand and his mother with the other. Sapphire ice cream was famous throughout the alliance and was also very expensive. Even the cheapest type cost more than 10,000. Their neighbors' kids were always having sapphire ice cream. And Hansen also had tried it a few times when he was younger. However, when Han Yen was born, they were already bankrupt, so they couldn't afford such luxuries anymore. Having the impression that the ice cream was delicious, Hansen could no longer remember what it tasted like. When the three came to Sapphire, all the seats were taken, and there was a long line to buy ice cream. "Let's go upstairs." Before Hansen entered the store, he saw through the window that the second floor was almost empty, so he thought the ladies could go upstairs and have a seat while he would stand in line alone. At the stairs, he was stopped by a waiter. "I am sorry, you cannot go up," the waiter said. "Why? Aren't there any seats upstairs?" Hansen frowned. Contemptuous and impatient, the waiter pointed to a notice on the wall. "You should have heard about our rule even if you have never had our ice cream before." Hansen looked at the notice, which said, "The distinguished and aristocrats only," and understood what he was referring to. So the second floor was an area exclusively for people with privileges, and ordinary people weren't even allowed to enter. No wonder the second floor had much better decorations yet was so empty. "We don't need to sit down. We'll just wait here, and you go get Yen ice cream," said Luo Sulan, trying to spare Hansen. "I'm going." Hansen smiled and went to the back of the line. He seemed to be indifferent, but was suddenly possessed by an aspiration. "What's so special about the distinguished and aristocrats? Soon I shall have it all and more. The stupid notice will never get in my way again." There still were no empty seats when it was his turn to buy the ice cream, so Hansen had to order takeout. Before leaving, he took another look at the notice, "The distinguished and aristocrats only." The next morning, Hansen was on the train going to the teleport station, with many passengers sharing his destination. Most people could not afford a teleport device, so they had to enter God's sanctuary using a public teleport station. Today, the conductor seemed to be in a bad mood. While Hansen was deep in thought about what to do in God's sanctuary, a violent shake of the train left everyone who was standing falling to the sides. Since he wasn't paying attention, Hansen also involuntarily staggered a few steps forward and fell on something soft. Subconsciously wanting to see something to regain his balance, he felt strange because what he was holding on to was even more soft and tender. Then he found that he had bumped into a woman in military uniform, and his hands were on her chest. "Bastard!" The woman scowled and elbowed him fast and hard. If she were to succeed, Hansen would have lost half his face. He subconsciously raised an arm to block the hit, felt a strong hit on his arm and involuntarily stepped back several steps. The woman turned around and viciously stared at Han Senator. She exclaimed with just one look, "You ass." Qin Xian. She didn't finish her sentence, but Han Sen cried in fear. This woman in uniform happened to be the woman from whom he had gotten a nickname as Freak. Han Sen did not expect Qin Xian also to be on Roka planet, and it seemed that she had enlisted in the army. Being in the military was nothing uncommon in the Alliance, as all legitimate residents of the Alliance needed to serve at least 5 years when they turned 20. When Han Sen turned 20, he would also become a soldier, if there were no special reason for him not to serve. Qin Xian recognized Han Sen, but didn't initiate a fight. She just looked at him with a cold and slightly disgusted look. Han Sen thought ruefully, she must think I'm a pervert now. I don't even blame her. I did stab her in the bottom and now. If I were her, I'd assume the same. There are so many planets in the Alliance, how is Qin Xian here as well? And what are the chances that I would meet her and did this to her? Han Sen thought plaintively. There was no way around it, he would have to let the situation play itself out. In the Alliance, wounding others was not allowed. Qin Xian did not want to make a scene, so she just glowered at him and didn't move further. Han Sen had goosebumps from her staring and immediately got off the train once he reached the teleport station. To his surprise, Qin Xian followed behind him. Dogs can't help from eating *T. I thought you were just innocent, while you are by nature a disgusting person, Qin Xian said fiercely. You saw what happened. It was the train, and so many others also fell. It was just a coincidence, Han Sen said with a wry smile. Would you believe that if you were me? Qin Xian said coldly. What do you want? Qin Xian had identified him as a bastard, so there was no need to explain. You really are brazen, showing no remorse for what you did. It must not be the first time you have done something like this. Seeing that Han Sen wasn't going to apologize, Qin Xian raged, you think I'll just send you to the police? It's not that easy. I can't beat you up here, but in God's sanctuary, it will be a different story. You are going there, right? I'll wait for you. Qin Xian immediately left and the soldiers saluted her, good morning, station master. Han Sen stumbled and couldn't believe what he saw. He almost wanted to cry. All teleport stations belonged to the military system. A garrison was assigned to each station, and the station master was the garrison's chief executive. Han Sen had heard that the old station master was to be transferred, and he couldn't believe that Qin Xian would be the new station master, not even in his wildest dreams. Han Sen had a bad feeling about the whole thing. As the station master, Qin Xian would know his whereabouts very well. And it wasn't even possible for him to use a different teleport station. There are 3 public teleport stations on planet Roka, but the other 2 were too far away, and he couldn't waste 2 days on traveling. Han Sen entered God's sanctuary when Qin Xian went to her office. He decided to wait until she left the shelter before he teleported back home. Han Sen gave Qin Xian no chance to intercept him. Taking some meat jerky made from the mutant scorpion, Han Sen left steel armor shelter. Did I use up my luck when I found the black crystal? Han Sen thought, depressed. He did not go far before seeing Son of Heaven and his gang standing outside the shelter chatting. Han Sen wasn't interested in meeting up with them and went the other way. However, Luo Tianyang called him from behind, "Ass freak, come here." Reluctantly, Han Sen had to turn around toward Luo Tianyang, perplexed. "I'm calling you. Come here and you'll get lucky." Luo Tianyang waved to him, smiling maliciously. "There is no need. I'm not strong. I can only deal with ordinary creatures and can't even fight primitive creatures. I am afraid I cannot help you." Han Sen knew it was never good when Luo Tianyang called him. "Cut the crap. Do you want a beating? I said come." Luo Tianyang gazed at Han Sen with his face dark. In addition to Han Sen, Son of Heaven and his gang were also joined by a few thugs they paid to come along. The group left steel armor shelter and marched into the mountains. Although they expected nothing good to happen, they still wanted to take the chance for the sake of the generous reward. In the past, if Han Sen had not been blocked by Qin Xian and Son of Heaven, he might also have risked his life for the bounty. Now Han Sen had no reason to take such risks, but it was clear that Son of Heaven and Luo Tianyang wanted to use him as a stepping stone, which made him want to kill them both. Han Sen quietly followed them, guessing what they were about to do. When recruiting people, the gang had said they were hunting a mutant creature, and it was only because there were also many ordinary and primitive creatures that they needed more hands. Hansen of course couldn't take this seriously. To kill a mutant creature, the regular gang was more than enough. The dozen people around Son of Heaven could all kill a mutant creature on their own, let alone Son of Heaven himself. The extra hands were completely unnecessary, according to their story. Luo Tianyang and others casually killed the creatures they encountered along the way, and gave the meat to the hired people casually, which made everyone quite happy. The group had been going for 6 or 7 days, and the gang still had no intention of stopping. On the 8th day, they halted at a mountain pass. Very far from the shelter, there was no human activity. They encountered many different creatures. Son of Heaven and his gang had killed a lot of primitive animals on the way and kept some of the flesh as food. It seems that we are almost there. What on earth are they up to? Han Sen had not heard anything, but judging from the grave look on their faces, this couldn't be a simple operation. They rested for a day at the campsite and crossed the mountain pass the next morning. After hiking a dozen miles, they saw a gap in the canyon so deep and dark that no one could see the bottom. Everyone lit a torch. The gang sent the hired people as the vanguard and followed them into the gap. The hired ones all knew it was time to put their life on the line, so they were dawdling. "Why are you going so slowly, bitches? Do you still want the rest of the money?" Luo Tianyang whipped a few people in the back and shouted. The thugs could only speed up going down. Han Sen was among them. It was not too difficult to walk down, and nothing happened along the way until they reached the bottom. The thugs were relieved and started to talk and laugh again. It was very dark at the bottom of the gap, and the group had to rely on the torches. There was an underground river running through the huge space. Cross the river and go into the cave on the other side. Luo Tianyang pointed his whip to the other side. "Luo, I cannot swim. This river is too wide," said a young man who had been recruited. "Who told you to swim? We have inflatable boats. Just row across." Luo Tianyang opened the parcel on the back of his mount, and there were indeed inflatable boats in there. After they inflated the boats, each one could sit 4 to 5 people. The group started to row the boats across. The speed of the water was not fast, and there was no risk of being rushed downstream. 2 boats soon reached the center of the river. All of a sudden, with a splash, a dark creature emerged from the water with half of its python-like body exposed. Its body was wider than a bucket and covered with shiny black fine scales. Its mouth was so large that it could fit a cow. But it wasn't a cow that was swallowed, rather someone on the boat. The giant body then put its full weight on the boat, which exploded with everyone on it falling into the water. Everyone was shocked and trying to row the boats back. Those who hadn't gone on the boat just dropped their boat and started to run back. With a glint of cold steel, the 2 running the fastest were beheaded by Luo Tianyang and another gang member. Luo Tianyang pointed the knife with blood on it at the rest and cried ruthlessly, "There is but one monster, so whoever reaches the other side can live. And I'll kill anyone who took the money and tries to run away. To live or to die, it is up to you." Everyone was intimidated by Luo Tianyang's vicious act and started to row towards the other side. "Assholes, you just want to feed the monster with humans," Han Sen cursed in his heart. Those who fell into the water before were trying to swim to the other side but were suddenly pulled into the water by something. It was so dark that no one saw what happened to them, but their fate could be imagined from the thick scent of blood. The hired boys dared not move forward, and Luo Tianyang used his knife again to force them. They didn't want to stay in the river, so they had to row hard. Han Sen lit the surroundings with his torch while rowing the boat. In case the monster came out of the water, he had to summon Sacred Blood Beast Soul Armor at once to save his life. The monster again collapsed a boat, and everyone on it was screaming. Then what could be heard was only the waves rolling. Row harder if you want to live. Han Sen yelled at the two on the boat with him who were petrified as he was rowing his heart out. #King Heartless Bastards. He swore quietly. The two men were revived by Han Sen's shout, and started to row desperately. From time to time there were screams and splashes. Countless men must have been buried in the snake belly. There was no doubt that this giant snake was a sacred blood creature. Aquatic creatures were hard enough to kill, let alone a sacred blood creature. With his normal gang, Son of Heaven didn't even dare to hunt it, but was only trying to fill out the group, so that they could safely reach the other side. Han Sen took a look at the other side as he was rowing. After they passed the middle of the river, the torch could light up the other side a little bit. Since Han Sen had started to practice jade skin, his body function seemed to get a lot better. Vision was also a lot stronger than before, and he seemed to have gained night vision as well. Now he could clearly see a cave 6 to 9 feet wide on a cliff. Although there was no path, the cave must have been the gang's destination. Han Sen was looking at the cave when he heard a loud splash. His heart sank as he saw the giant snake popping out of water less than 6 feet from their boat, its mouth moving towards the boat and its fangs showing. Without thinking, Han Sen jumped into the water and summoned his armor underwater. Like a fish, he struggled to swim across the river. The whole process of crossing the river was tragic. It wasn't clear whether the black snake was insatiable or just determined to kill humans, but only 2 boats reached the other side, and only 7 people lived. All the others were in the water and most likely dead. The snake didn't show up again. Son of Heaven, although the snake was a sacred blood creature, it was not intelligent. Now it is full, we should not have too much risk crossing, said Luo Tianyang, smiling. Go over. Son of Heaven gave the order, and the gang went over in 3 boats. As expected, the snake didn't attack anymore and they all landed safely. Luo Tianyang whipped the 7 survivors, who were forced to walk inside the cave, trembling. They regretted so much that they had coveted the bounty. What was money good for if they died here? But they did not encounter any other creatures along the way. In half an hour, they reached the end of the cave. At the end of the cave there was a pool, and next to the pool was a gravel nest 30 feet wide. In the middle of the nest there lay 2 eggs the size of ostrich eggs with black patterns. Son of Heaven was overjoyed. Haha, awesome! Eggs of sacred blood creatures, and there are 2 of them. Now my sacred Geno points could go over 80. Even so, he did not lose his caution and winked at Luo Tianyang, who was equally excited. The latter understood immediately and forced the survivors to fetch the eggs. Trembling, they walked into the gravel nest and carried out the 2 eggs. However, before they were able to leave the nest, the pool started to bubble, and bang! A huge snake head stuck out, the dark red snake eyes staring at the egg thieves. Damn! Throw the eggs over, Son of Heaven shouted to them, but they were dumbfounded by the snake up close and did not reply him. Useless motherf *#curs. Son of Heaven scolded and summoned his red sword, running forward. The gang all summoned their weapons and followed him. Rushing in front of the survivors, Son of Heaven grabbed the eggs and ran towards the mouth of the cave. The snake was originally concerned about its eggs and didn't move. Seeing Son of Heaven running away with them, it went into a rage and left the pool, chasing the gang madly. Block it, cried Son of Heaven, while he kept running without pause. Luo Tianyang was even more ruthless. He grabbed 2 shivering survivors and threw them at the snake. Catching one in the mouth, the snake swallowed him without chewing. The rest of the gang all followed suit, using the survivors as human shields, which temporarily resisted the snake's attack. They took advantage of it and retreated. Son of Heaven ran fast, holding the 2 snake eggs. It took him no time to arrive at the mouth of the cave. When he was excited, a golden fist appeared in front of him and hit him on the face. He hadn't expected someone hiding behind the cave mouth and was unprepared for the attack. Blood spilling and nose crooked, he fell back with his hand covering his face. The two snake eggs suddenly flew out from his arms. A golden figure jumped up, caught one egg with each hand, and ran toward the river. Son of Heaven fell to the ground, clutching his face. He immediately managed to climb up, saw the unique golden armor and recognized who it was. Hansen reached the river and suddenly saw waves roaring. A huge black-scaled snake appeared from the river. F***K. There is another one. Hansen looked back and saw the other snake chasing the gang. You are so F***ked. Son of Heaven hated Dollar's guts and gloated that he was stopped by the snake. Hansen quickly had an idea as the snake in the river glared at him. He pushed hard with his right hand secretly, and then threw the snake egg at Son of Heaven. Catch. We will each keep one egg, and let's deal with the snakes together first. Who agreed to that? I will get both eggs and kill you. Thinking Hansen was terrified, Son of Heaven sneered and caught the egg, but the egg broke when it hit him and the egg was all over him. Son of Heaven was stunned. Roar! The giant snake shrieked and rushed madly toward Son of Heaven, who was covered in egg, leaving Hansen alone. Hansen turned and ran with the remaining snake egg. Jumping on an inflatable boat, he desperately rowed to the other side without looking back. He still had an egg with him, and if both snakes decided to go for him, it would be no fun at all. F***K. Hansen heard cursing from behind, followed by all sorts of human voices and the beast's roar. Hansen went to the other side, jumped onto the shore and ran out of the big gap. Without a pause, he ran toward the shelter. After running for a while, Hansen started to get uneasy. In case Son of Heaven and his gang escaped, they would definitely go for him, and he could by no means outrun their mounts. Hansen decided to go into the forest and take a detour so that he didn't risk being caught by them. They had been in the shelter for years, and everyone was fit and had plenty of beast souls. Even though they were no match for the snakes, surely some of them could get away. It was best to be careful. That night, Hansen found a corner to take shelter from the wind and got some firewood. Sealing the snake egg with a layer of mud, he put it on the fire and barbecued it. While cooking, Hansen murmured, "Pure life, before you see this dirty world, let me handle the sin and send you back to heaven." Young obsidian dragon killed. No beast soul gained. Eat it to gain 0 to 10 sacred geno points randomly. Having barbecued it for a while, Hansen heard the voice. So it was not a snake. Unfortunately I didn't gain the beast soul, Hansen thought greedily. Soon the egg was cooked and Hansen used a stick to get the egg out of the fire. Breaking the burnt mud crust on the outside, he saw the delicious egg white. Hansen took a bite, and the egg was so much better than a chicken egg. Young obsidian dragon eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. Hansen ate the whole egg and was so full he couldn't move. He had gained 5 sacred geno points. Adding the 8 points he already had, Hansen now had 13 sacred geno points. It took Hansen 8 or 9 days to reach Steel Armor Shelter. Son of Heaven and his gang had been back for 2 days already when he arrived. There were only 8 in the gang that returned alive, and everyone was injured. Even some of Son of Heaven's henchmen had died. Son of Heaven wouldn't say what they had done, and Qin Xian and Fist Guy failed to find out. Several hired thugs, however, had come back alive after they had fallen into the water. And through them, Qin Xian and Fist Guy eventually learned what had happened. They still had no idea what had happened after the hired men fell into the water, so just took for granted that the gang was hurt by the obsidian dragons. Their guess was only half right, because the egg thrown by Han Sen also contributed a lot to the gang's predicament. After all, they wouldn't have had to fight the dragons if he hadn't done that. Son of Heaven was afraid of being ridiculed, and did not tell what happened later, while secretly he launched a new search for Dollar. It is a pity that Son of Heaven and Luo Tianyang didn't die. Han Sen learned what had happened and felt relieved. He was afraid that Son of Heaven might suspect something, seeing he had returned alone. Now that there were other survivors, Han Sen naturally had nothing to worry about, and caught a primitive copper-toothed beast on his way back to the shelter. If Son of Heaven and his gang came to interrogate him, he could just say he was rushed downstream and got lucky. Han Sen was thinking too much, because Son of Heaven did not have the time to ask him and didn't make the connection at all. More than half a month was spent on the expedition. Han Sen teleported out of God's sanctuary to see his mother and sister. However, at the gate of the transport station, Qin Xian was standing at the exit, looking at him coldly. "You sure can hide. It's been more than half a month since I saw you. Do you think I'll spare you from the punishment you deserve?" "Miss Qin, what do you want?" Han Sen looked at her, depressed. Qin Xian was now the station master, and there was no way to bypass her. "Easy, take this and come with me." Qin Xian threw a combat suit at Han Sen. "You would not kill me anyway," Han Sen thought, taking the combat suit and following her back to the station. They didn't teleport to God's sanctuary but to the combat room in the station. Han Sen put on the combat suit and entered the room, where Qin Xian stood in a red combat suit with black stripes. A combat suit was not just clothing, but a high-tech product that could function as armor, with inbuilt sensors which recorded all data during fighting, including heart rate, breathing, punch speed, and the impact taken. This allowed the users to understand their physical status and determine their future practice methods. "If you win, I will leave you alone for good." Qin Xian curled her finger, indicating Han Sen should attack. "You are about to max out on sacred Geno points and have so many beast souls. I just graduated, and you have trained in the army for so long. Why don't you just say you want to kill me?" Even if Han Sen could win, he didn't want to expose the fact that he was Dollar. And he wasn't confident about the fight. "No beast soul allowed. And we are clear if you can still stand after 50 movements, Qin Xian said casually. "Deal." Han Sen believed he could endure 50 movements if he focused on defense. Qin Xian had made up her mind to kick Han Sen's ass. The first time, when Han Sen stabbed her in the rear, she could attribute it to his ignorance, while the harassment on the train couldn't be a coincidence. Having identified Han Sen as a freak and bastard, Qin Xian walked up to him with anger in her eyes and said, "You start." Bang! Han Sen punched her in the face. Clutching her nose and stepping back, Qin Xian stared at him, not believing what had happened. Han Sen was not like any man she had seen. She let him start and he just immediately punched her, which was completely beyond her expectations. That's why she was not prepared for it. They were standing close to each other, so she was hit on the nose. In her understanding, in a showdown, the two opponents should go to the middle and take their positions. And men always acted as gentlemen in front of her. Even if they were weaker, they'd still want to show their masculinity. No one was like Han Sen, who threw a punch without a sign, hitting her face, where she wasn't even covered by protective gear. "I'm sorry, so sorry, have we not started?" Hansen repeatedly apologized. He thought he'd let her beat him to let out the anger, and wanted it to end sooner. He didn't expect that he could hit her nose, which soon turned red. "We had started, and will continue, you, bang." Qin Xian had more to say, but he acted hearing, continue, and hit her on the nose again. She was in so much pain she had to squat on the floor. "You said continue, so I thought." Han Sen quickly explained. "I'll kill you." Qin Xian jumped from the ground. Not caring about the rules anymore, she moved forward and started to beat Han Sen up. Resisting Qin Xian's beating, Han Sen found his fighting skills were much weaker than Qin Xian's, and he couldn't even play defense. He barely got through a dozen punches and was beaten down. Weigh less than 50. See you next time. Qin Xian turned away, leaving behind Han Sen, who was wounded all over. Han Sen stood up with a wry smile on his face. Wearing a combat suit, he wasn't injured seriously. It was just some pain he would have to put up with. The worst part was he seemed to have enraged Qin Xian even more. After Han Sen left the station to return home, Qin Xian took a shower and was about to delete the video and data of the fight right away. She was the station master and the strongest woman in Steel Armor Sanctuary. There was no way she'd let people see the video of herself being punched in the nose by a freak. Before deletion, Qin Xian watched it again, and she was momentarily shocked. She thought that the reason she was hit was that Han Sen took advantage when she wasn't prepared. After carefully reviewing it several times, Qin Xian suddenly found that although this was a very important reason, it couldn't fully explain her being hit. Was it, thought Qin Xian, and repeatedly watched the part when he hit her and compared the data collected by the combat suit. So, his fist fighting skills are really poor, just about the normal level of a compulsory education graduate, but his movements were explosive and unexpected, Qin Xian mumbled as she was checking the data. And there was something about him, like a killer. Before he made a move, I could not predict his intention, and that had left me unguarded. When he threw a punch, there wasn't even the slightest change in his emotions, not even when he was hitting hard. The separation of behaviors and emotions should belong to a good assassin, a fatal blow under ordinary cover. No, he just graduated, and there is no way he is an assassin. Also, his movements were too bad for him to be one. So, this separation was just his innate talent. Qin Xian could only think of this one possibility. What she didn't know was that Han Sen was really poor when he entered God's sanctuary, at the time he offended both Qin Xian and Son of Heaven. No one dared to be with him, and no one dared to trade with him. The new graduate started to hunt creatures using an ordinary alloy dagger, without any experience. Even just ordinary creatures posed great threats to a beginner, not to mention that they often came in groups, so Han Sen must have taken an individual creature by surprise and killed it. Once surrounded by a group, he could only wait to die. To minimize the danger, he had to ambush and attack, and the most important part was not to alert the creatures, who had more acute senses than men. In the first month, Han Sen was honing these skills. In failure after failure, he learned to hide his emotions and intentions, so that the creature sensed no danger even when he approached. It was like playing dirty, but it was also the only way for him to survive at that point. Later, he had to keep practicing and improve his skills in order to kill primitive creatures, and gradually they became part of his instinct. Although Han Sen's fighting skills were not even close to advanced, he was no worse than a great assassin in his explosiveness and timing. Like an assassin, his skills were also honed between life and death, and the only difference was that it was the creatures instead of men that he killed. He seems to have great strength, speed and explosiveness, which indicates that he has fairly high geno points, unless he is practicing hyper-geno arts. Qin Xian looked at some data, but didn't worry too much about it. Han Sen's data was indeed better than average, but data like this can be seen anywhere in the shelter. It was only a bit unexpected that it belonged to Han Sen. Talented but vulgar and despicable. I'll just teach him a lesson next time, thought Qin Xian bitterly. Because of Han Sen's sneak attacks, she labeled him as despicable again. It was indeed hard for most people to imagine that Han Sen had integrated the sneak attack skills into his practice and instinct. The reason why Han Sen could hit Son of Heaven in the face was his sneak attack skills. Or else someone like him could never hit Son of Heaven, who had great geno points and hyper-geno arts. Sneak attack didn't sound good, but it was practical. When he got home, Han Sen had dinner with his mother and Han Yen. The next day, he did not go to God's sanctuary but took the train to a martial hall. Han Sen had only learned basic martial arts in the past, and those were designed for people who had no Geno points. As one started to gain Geno points in God's sanctuary, one became stronger in general. With the practice of hyper-Geno arts, the body had become even more unique, and this difference allowed people like him to practice certain martial arts that normal people could not practice. These martial arts can be learned at martial halls as well as at advanced colleges. And martial masters who worked at martial halls taught these for a living. Unlike in ancient times, these martial masters did not rely on their inherited fame, nor did they want to leave legacies. Their only goal was to make profit. So, the more money a student spent, the better martial arts were taught. Martial arts all had certain requirements for physical conditioning. If the requirements were not met, it wouldn't be possible to practice. In the past, Han Sen had no money and no significant enhancement in his physical conditioning. Now with 13 sacred Geno points and lots of other Geno points, he had become stronger. The practice of jade skin had also helped. Now his physical condition was among the best in his peer group. Ares Martial Hall was famous on Roca planet. The tuition there was very expensive, but the martial arts taught were very good. The owner of the martial hall was a veteran and was famous back in the days when he was serving. After getting severely injured in a battle, he went back to Roca to open Ares Martial Hall. Everyone called the veteran Old Devil. As long as you paid enough, he would teach you anything, and you could indeed learn some really good skills. Young man, want to learn something? We have elementary classes, intermediate classes, advanced classes and special classes here. You can learn fist fighting, weapon skills, and even hyper-Geno arts here. For an elementary class, you could choose to learn a martial art that I define as elementary for $10,000. For an intermediate class, you could choose a martial art that I define as intermediate for $100,000. Advanced classes are each for $1 million, and special classes are each for $10 million. At these prices, I could guarantee a good learning outcome. Fellow, you look like you have a bright future ahead of you. Do you want to sign up for all special classes? All 12 martial arts for only $50 million. Old Devil looked at Han Sen with a greedy smile, like a dragon looking at gold. I would like to sign up for an advanced class to learn Ghost Haunt. Han Sen came here for a reason. His dad had learned from Old Devil and told him Old Devil has a great martial art called Ghost Haunt. Unfortunately, his dad's physical condition hadn't reached the required level for Ghost Haunt, so he couldn't learn it. He always had regretted that and asked Han Sen to learn Ghost Haunt when he grew up. Han Sen also heard from his father that Ghost Haunt was especially effective on women. Han Sen had once again offended Qin Xian, and it didn't look like she would let it go easily. Not willing to be bullied by her, he thought of his father's words about Old Devil and Ghost Haunt and wanted to take the opportunity. After all, $1 million was a piece of cake for him right now. Although Ghost Haunt is among the most advanced, its requirements were even higher than those of special classes. You must at least max out on mutant Geno points to stand a chance. How fit are you? Old Devil looked at Han Sen in surprise. No one had chosen Ghost Haunt in a while because of its high entry barrier. You can test me to see if I can meet the standards. Han Sen was not sure whether he would pass either. Technically, with 13 sacred Geno points, he should be more fit than those who had maxed out on mutant Geno points. 10,000 test fee for a physical fitness test. Old Devil placed a card reader in front of Han Sen. Han Sen took out his credit card and paid 10,000, and Old Devil was quite pleased by his generosity. After scanning and testing in a dozen instruments, the test result was out, which slightly surprised Old Devil. Your physical fitness is very good. You must have almost maxed out on ordinary, primitive and mutant Geno points. Can I learn Ghost Haunt? Han Sen gave no reply, as his mutant Geno points were less than 10, and sacred Geno points and jade skin would explain his fitness. Yes. 1 million. Old Devil did not ask further, placing the card reader once again in front of Hansen. While a bit upset about spending his hard-earned money, Hansen paid for it. Young man, you have great things lined up for you. Come with me. You'll have to memorize Ghost Haunt first. Old Devil showed Hansen into a screening room, turned on the hologram and left him alone in the room. It was Old Devil himself practicing Ghost Haunt in the hologram. Hansen looked for a while, and his eyes widened. He thought to himself, wow, so that's what you mean by, especially effective on women, Dad.